Please stand and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You know what? This is the first person I thought of.
I just want to say one thing in response to that. My kids get into good schools and no money's exchanged with any college.
You don't even get any money, right? Yeah.
But isn't it weird you could give the school $500,000 to build a building?
Well, this is why wouldn't they just make a donation and like endow a chair? That would get their kids.
Too easy.
This is much shadier. But also, like, USC football, like, how can you fake USC football? Like, I understand, like, the crew team or whatever.
Wasn't it mostly like soccer and
USC
there
football.
were? Wow.
One of them, they had to send a picture, which I think is just not. One of them actually had to become a punter over the summer and take a picture.
You know what most people were trying to get into? University of Wisconsin.
Really?
Like 11 or 12 people.
There's a lot more to come. Wow. A lot. That guy, they said that he helped almost 1,000 people. It was some crazy number. And I wonder if we know any of them. Well, there's a guy.
Yeah, that made her look real good. She said tailgating, game day, and no class.
And I saw one person spend like $6.5 million. I'm like, just give the kid $6.5 million and start a business. What are you gonna go to college? They must have really bad grades.
Yeah, think about that.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, how bad were those grades for $6.5 million? Anyway, first up is a budget workshop, Recreation and Parks Department. Thanks for being here, Joe, and our PAC members.
Thank you.
We look forward to hearing what you have to say and considering your requests.
Well, it's a request. I'd recommend you start with the summary tab that Brenda prepared for you. And before we start, I would like to make sure I let you know how much help Brenda and Larry have been. We've really been trying hard to make sure that what we put in front of you tonight is really reflective of what we need. And you know, I almost had one of those rare moments where Larry's lip trembled when I was trying to defend a couple of things, and he just looked at me and said, "Tell us what you need and be ready to explain it." So we went back and spent time with our PAC, with Dr. Lonke, and you know, we are very comfortable that what's in front of you is what we think we need to have a great 2019 and 20. If you look at that summary page, the things on top are things that we obviously don't control, so unless you have questions, I'm not sure there's anything there I can provide other than those are numbers that get plugged in based on the commitment the village has to its full-time employees. And those cover the 7140 Parks, 7310 Recreation, and the 7610, which is the senior line. So now we'll get into the stuff, and everything on this page is, there are obviously lines from our budgets that aren't on here. These are there because they reflect a change that should get looked at by you, and a closer look than just the regular numbers. Or I'll give you an example. Teenscape's not here because it's pretty much the same request and revenue it was last year. So we're really trying to just focus on the things that are different. So if you turn to the first background page, that first line, which is the second largest request for increase, is the parks labor line. And what we tried to do, instead of just giving you a labor line and saying, okay, this is how much we're going to spend, and you know, Joe, you hire who you want, we tried to give you a picture of how that money is actually used. And you know, again, the point to remember, especially when you're looking at the parks and the labor, is that our two employees are two employees who have been with the village for quite a bit of time. Chris, 35 years, maybe even more than that. Scotty, well over 20. When you put down what they get for vacation time and their personal time, and even before you even put a sick day in there, I've got to make up over 70 days of manpower. So that's not easy to do in a two-man department. So, and again, as we've got bigger projects and capital projects going on, there's a need for Chris, who's also the foreman, to do a lot of work in front of his computer, whether it be pricing mulch or clay or fibar or sand. I mean, you don't just do that, and I need him to look at that, because, for example, when we're looking to buy clay, he'll call a company and ask for samples. And when they start talking about vitrified clay and things like that, I'm not going to be able to answer all the questions. I need his expertise for that. So if you look at this, basically the first thing, that would be covering us for the summer. In the original request that I had prepared, it was for 16 weeks. But because I really felt, when I looked at the first attempt at the budget and Larry turned red, that I would go back in and try to take a few things down. So the 13 weeks for the 6 people, the way I'm trying to make up for cutting back on the weeks is I'm going to stagger when some of them start and when some of them finish, so that at all times I'd have at least 4 or 5 people in. The other option, and it depends which direction I choose to go in, is I may go to where the 6 guys will only work 4 days as opposed to 5 days, and again, just as a way to try to get them in. It's the key part of the year, obviously. And then the second one is in October and November and December, there's still a need to supplement the 2 men, so having the ability, this originally was a 2 staff request, which I also cut back to 1. October and November are times where the parks have to start getting prepared for the winter. There's a lot of stuff that needs to get done, and you know, if Chris and Scott were there every one of those days, it's a push. It's hard to even at that, but considering some of them may be out, I need the ability to bring somebody in to help them. The same thing, we're not looking or asking for anyone specifically in January and February, but then in March, which is right now, I mean, if you go down to Scenic Hudson Park, you will see there are piles of material that are dropped off. Friday, we have 100 light bulbs being delivered because every light in Scenic Hudson Park is scheduled to be changed because our 10-year contract is up, and part of the contract is you get new lights on every fixture.
The sports lighting.
The sports lighting in the park. So that there's a lot of work involved with even doing that and setting it up. So it's a busy time, and you know, I met with the AD today, and he asked if he could play a baseball game on March 23rd, and after we laughed at him, the next request was they want to start playing as early in April as they can. We actually are going to try to get them on the outfields within a week so that they can at least get outside. But there's a reason for needing someone in March and April. Then there's the line where it's just basically 5,000 available, emergencies, winter. If I need to call people in for a storm, if there's an event that I need some extra people for, that's a number I'm very comfortable with. The next one is the Matheson Park gate attendant, and that number is really based on need. I'm assuming 25 weeks of time, Saturdays and Sundays and holidays, and then the occasional time in the week. There are times when we host huge school events where having someone at the gate is important because a teacher who's late tries to drive their car through the park, and it's necessary to have someone there. And then the Scenic Hudson Park, you know, basically for us, weather permitting, we open up our own season on Sunday, April 7th, and from the day we start, we have someone in the park every Monday through Friday and every Saturday, Sunday. For some time, the Monday through Friday is usually 5 or 5:30 until, if they're games and a late game, they could be there as late as 11 o'clock. Some nights it could be as early as 9:30 or 10, but it fluctuates. But it's critical to have someone in there, especially when you've got, you know, multiple things going on. And for the most part, once we start, that field will stay very busy throughout the summer and into the fall. And then the last one, which is the baby, and it is, you know, we're looking like we did this year to extend the spray pool at Station Road Park, and the only thing that may be a problem there is we may be facing a pretty big capital project with piping that might need to be dug in the Station Road playground area. We had to do some temporary fix in the fall last year to get us through the winter, and Tom Bucci and I are going to take a look at it with Chris, and we have to determine whether or not we need to look for something more. If we do, Station Road Park might be closed for some time, but hopefully that won't happen and we'll be able to operate. And so that's it. It's a total, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Sure.
just on this page, I want you to go away from this page. At the top, we have the 6 staff at the first, June, July, August. So I know the bottom part is the increase where you say 19,660, but what's the current number of part-time staff in that time period?
We had
Not
we had 7 last summer.
So you had 7, so that one is a decrease in the number of people.
Right.
But, and so it's not a decrease in the number of weeks. Is there an increase in that line?
Well, there's actually less weeks. I went over budget in that line this year, so even though I'm asking for more, we were over. I'm trying to come back. We also, with the increase with the recycling and the hours that I have to dedicate men to that kind of, we had originally projected about $6,000 spent on that. I kept 2 guys on longer than maybe I should have, but I felt it was necessary at the time. So everything under the 6 is the same exact plan that was there last year. We just didn't break it out for you in this detail in the budget. And the first line, like I said, we had 7 people last year, but because most of them are returning, Chris and I feel we can get away with 1 less because we don't have as much teaching to do. The staff coming back for the most part have all been through it. It makes it a lot easier when you don't have to spend time training people.
So in other words.
I have the same question as Connie.
Yeah, that's
What's the $20,000?
Yeah, so there's no increase
What's
there.
increased here?
That is not an increase.
So we have
That's
the
half a
total
chunk.
requested, which is
Yeah.
$20,000 more than
Well,
last
if
year.
you go to the first page, not the first page, just give me a second.
So this is on the computer-generated report.
Right.
If you go a little bit further back,
It's on page 2 of 11.
so these computer pages.
Right,
Yeah.
Oh, my favorite.
So 2 of 11, yeah.
Right.
And if you look at 123, you'll see the original budget last year was 85,000. We added 6 to that for the recycling project, which made 91, and I'm at 94 right now. So, again, the extra work, the extra projects, they add up,
So it's basically an increase in the number of hours you needed?
Not in that line.
I think what we're struggling with is, there are fewer staff,
Yeah,
so you're
Where's
using them
the
for more hours?
20,000 then?
Well, we had more people work through September and October.
Okay, so-
We're only going with 1 now in that period.
But more hours.
More-
So the increase basically reflects you need more people hours,
Correct.
not numbers of people, but people hours.
Correct.
Got it, okay,
Right.
that's clear.
Sorry, it wasn't clear.
My brain is-
The issue is that on our printouts, we don't see the itemization of last year.
Yeah.
Because it was never itemized before, this is the first time you're really itemizing it.
No,
Well, for example, even, right.
Before we don't see.
That's why, and because we wanted to make sure you had a chance to look at it, that's why, and you'll see as we go forward in the next pages, we're trying to give you a better chance to put the pieces together.
the only reason you're saying that is to show us what the previous year was for in the next year.
On the computer printout?
No, we can't.
Oh, you want me on my backup?
You have to do something because
Sure.
this report doesn't give it to us.
Understood.
Yeah.
Understood.
So this is helpful, but the other piece was as compared to,
So next year, I'm going to include this plus the new one, so you have a point of reference.
that'd be great. Yeah.
But I'm still trying to just figure out, like, which of these line items is higher? So for everyone you talk about is actually lower.
5, well, Matheson here was listed as 5 on this
The
other.
budget for the, I think what it comes down to is.
That's not really the year before,
The
right?
budget for the current year was under budgeted.
Okay.
That's the
That's, okay, so in other words,
So-
so last year this number was 50, but it really should have been 55, and now it's at 40, so whatever.
So this year's budget reflects
So-
what.
It's almost like you're reflecting actual, even
Reality.
though you're cutting.
So to get-
Reality.
Correct, so to get to where we are now, we needed to dig in to understand where those overages were. And that's, as in Joe's words, that's why I turned red. But we have to really dig in and understand all the moving parts, because there's a lot of moving parts, so, anyway, that's.
Right. The other thing
that's how
that
we
we're,
got it.
the other thing that we're doing throughout the whole budget, and this is a starting point, is monitoring it is going to be something that we pay more attention to. For example, at the end of September, I want to go in and look and see if I spent more than 46.8 in that period on labor, where and why.
Right.
So that we can look at it then and right away, and then, you know, if I have to, I've got to reduce something else that I've got coming up, instead of waiting until budget time and saying, oh, gee, I think that we've learned a few things along the way. We'll talk a little bit later about how we're going to change and build in a better way of revenue monitoring with Brenda and through our office. But, you know, this will help us, and, you know, we're planning on quarterly to go back and look and see how we are, especially with the areas that are on this sheet that are showing, you know, significant requests for increases.
So before we leave this line, I get that now, but, and I like, you know, what you just said about you have a lot of returning folks that take less training.
Correct.
That seems like a great thing. So, say June 1st, I'm just trying to imagine the most efficient way to make sure all these people are used well, which I know would be on your mind all the time, but does 6 new people come on June 1st all at once, or?
No, and that's what I said, before what I said is one of the things I'm going to do is once I have the 6 people locked in who I'm going to bring in, then I will determine who will start when, so that I can have coverage as long as possible. I may have one college student who's graduating, and I'll make sure he is the guy I keep around in September. I may have one who I know has to leave on August 15th, so I'll start him at the beginning of it. So it's just going to be a matter of staggering so that I always have enough people. The problem is that when we're in June, and when we're, the entire month of June, I have to dedicate 2 men 8 hours a day, not, of course, not actual in field, breakfast, lunch, whatever, but 8 hours just on a tractor cutting. I mean, we have to cut Matheson, Scenic, and Memorial twice a week during that time. So that's 2 guys who don't do anything but sit on a mower for those days. And there's no other way to do it. I need bodies for that. And if I don't have enough men, then, you know, I need men to do the fields. We have court preparation, the bathrooms, whether it be seating or whatever. There's just so many things that have to be done in the summer.
Yeah, I'm not questioning that there's a lot to be done. I'm down there in that park a lot. But I think the skill that I worry about is the managing of everybody's, the newer they are, the harder, to make sure people know if this job is done, there's another job to do. You know, you don't just wait and say, oh.
Well, what happens,
now what?
Connie, is Scott Brennan takes either 2 or 3 men with him, and Chris takes the rest. A lot of times they're dropped off at locations, like Anthony DiNardo might be brought to Memorial Park and told to just stay there and cut, and then one of either Scott or Chris go back and pick them up. So they all have places to go and things to do. And the one thing I've always said about Chris that I've always respected the most is Chris doesn't give anyone a job he wouldn't do. And he doesn't let them do it until he's seen what they do with it. So I think that they're well watched, well cared for, and are prepared for what they do. There are just certain things we don't let summer kids do. I mean, we don't let anyone who works for us drive until they're 21, and we don't even let them drive on the road with a cutting machine. It has to be driven by one of the senior people to the location. And then if we're using, let's say, a 19-year-old to cut the grass, they get on it at the park, not drive it through the streets of Irving.
No, I think your 2 full-time employees are very skilled and very
Appreciate that,
hardworking.
and I will pass that
I see
along.
them a lot.
Well, that's a good sign.
I worry about part-time, I'm gonna say kids, they could be any age, but just making sure they're efficiently used, know what they're supposed to do, you know, from when they get there to when they leave, and, you know, not to, you know,
We have a lot of things that.
hard
Right.
to make sure they're efficiently used, and that's the skill.
With all the things we have to look at and worry about, I would tell you that the ability of our part-timers to be productive is not one of the things we should worry about, because I think we get a lot out of them.
Good, glad to hear that.
So Joe and Larry, too, with all of these people and all of these dollars, I'm assuming that you still feel that hiring a third full-time person would not be something that you'd want to do at this point because of all the other added expenses going forward?
Yeah, I mean, look, the reality of a new full-time person is, much more than whatever the top salary is. The top salary might be, 65,000 or whatever it is. We're talking benefits and all the others. So, yeah, pretty much double.
And there's also the seasonality of it. You can't just like keep it full-time.
That's the problem, yeah.
For 5 months.
Two might be good, for 4 or 5 months out of the year, but.
Years ago, we actually had played around with, we had some discussion, if we were able to get a full-time person, the person would work for us from March or April through the beginning of the fall, and then they'd go over to DPW for the winter, and, because of the things that happen there. It might be something worth looking at somewhere down the road also, but, yeah, we've talked about it. Would I love another full-time guy? Absolutely. But do I think this works for us? The answer is yes, I do. Okay.
So I have two quick questions. They're both similar, but do impacts of certain of your child programs, shall we call them, like Dogs in the Park, or I don't know if it's best called trial program, but recycling containers. How is that affecting labor here?
Well,
Do they both affect your labor, or do you have monitoring on dog days or dog hours?
The dog issue is complicated and tied into the Matheson Park project that we're working on right now. And it's very complicated. But we're working capital request for you. We have a Matheson Park committee and a specific playground committee. And in order to meet what the public has told us at our meetings and our emails, and I think I may have mentioned this to you one other time I spoke, is the public wants wheels in the park. They want to be able to bring their dogs in the park, and they want a facelift to Matheson Park, which basically is the playground, which is 30 years old. We have been doing a lot of work, and we're ready for that. If we are approved for the capital request we put in front of you, RPAC, I think, is absolutely prepared to immediately, with the expansion of the pathways in the park, to allow bikes and wheels into Matheson. And with the new playground that would be fenced, we would be more than willing to consider allowing dogs on. Those two things, when the public heard those were the possibilities, actually changed the conversation, because people who wanted more were very pleased that we were willing to go that far. And we all feel that, 20 years ago, no wheels, no bikes in the park, it was okay. And the playground in Matheson, and it wasn't, it was 20 years ago, so it was still in good shape. Now, it's time to look at that stuff again. And we want wheels in the park. We've heard it from people.
But let me get back.
So,
I know that the big plans, and I'm just.
Okay, recycling has had an impact on us in the parks. We did find a pail that we like, that both Nikki and Leola, I'm sorry, not Nikki, that Ann and Leola supported. We've added them. There's a few.
What's the actual labor?
Well, it adds, it's just more time. It's probably an extra half hour to 45 minutes a day for 1 or 2 men, depending on how much has to be picked up. If it's a rainy Sunday on Monday, there's nothing to do.
So this is all factored into the labor
Yep.
on the quarterly or whatever changes?
We have enough to do it. The key is that on the weekends, I have to still try to keep the call out under 4 hours. because some of the things we've added really push on a Sunday in May. You've got 3 field preps, you have 3 bathrooms that have to be open, you have garbage pails in 3 parks that have to be open, you have to check the nature center, which every building gets checked every day. That's a push to get all that done with 2 guys, it really is, so. And the recycling makes that a little harder, because now instead of just going around and doing garbage, they've got to make a second loop where they pick up the recycling.
So one other thing, the thing like the dogs or the wheels in the park in Matheson, will that require, do you think that's gonna require additional supervision in the park like you have at Scenic Hudson?
I think it would, no, I think right now, if the rules stay the same for the park, we would run Matheson the way we do now. When there are weekends, when there are special events, a gate attendant would be put on. I do not
change if you have lights.
Right, if, you know, I don't know what we would do if the dogs are allowed, because the dogs are the one we have the most concern with. Unfortunately, they're the ones that break the rules the most. So I don't know how much it'll change.
The dog owners.
The dogs were in the reservoir the other day. I didn't see the owners, so I had to blame the dogs for that. But I don't know the impact yet, Mark, of the requested changes, but they're not going to happen this year. No, there's no impact on this budget.
Okay, yeah.
We can't let the bikes, I'm sorry, we can't let the bikes and wheels in either park right now, because our insurance company is telling us that the pathways are not wide enough to do it.
Right,
Okay?
okay, so that makes sense. But
Connie, I'm sorry.
something that you will have to think about.
Absolutely.
So is the 25 weeks at Matheson Park gate attendant, is that an increased number of weeks from time past? Or is that the same?
It starts in April, it ends when soccer ends in the fall. So usually 25 weeks is the rule.
And so that would have been last year and the year before and the year.
Might have been 22 last year, depending on when we started because of weather, but it's in that ballpark.
And again, Joe, the Matheson Park attendant's not there to check passes, is there?
The Matheson Park
What's
attendant,
going on?
again, and I've shared this at a lot of the public meetings, if there are 4 parties of 50 people, and the first person goes, you know, what happens to the next 3 groups who are coming in a couple of hours later? The gate attendant is there to make sure people don't bring in inappropriate things to the park, and that they follow the rules. Anyone who comes to the gate, okay, family, couple of people, mom, dad, and kids, if they're asked for a permit, if they don't have one, they're welcome to the park as our guest, and just ask next time if they wanted to come back with a group, they should reach out to the superintendent. Can't make it easier than that. Now, if a group shows up without a permit and there's 15, 20 people, and they're coming in and they've got 10 coolers or, you know, with them, they would likely be stopped and asked to go to Scenic Hudson Park. But not individuals, not small groups of people, no matter where they're from.
What, this isn't about budget, but if there was an incident that appeared to need the police, does the gate attendant call the police?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. When I sit with them at the beginning of the season, actually it's the hardest job to find. I can find people who'd go clean the geese poop before I can find someone to be the gate attendant. It's not a fun job to be there, but you know, we spend a lot of time with that. One of the things we worry about if there's not a gate attendant at all is that every time there's an incident and someone in the park calls the police, if the police can't deal with it, they're going to make a call out for one of our parks guys, which means every time they do, it's a 4-hour call out. And it could be for a very simple thing, whereas, you know, if there's no toilet paper in the bathroom and people call the police department, if I have a gate attendant there, we stock it. If not, do I make a 4-hour call out? I mean, that money would quickly go over what we're asking you to fund right now. So maybe we should go, because there's still a lot of things I think you're going to want to talk about. So the park professional fees, one of the reasons this went up a little bit is now that we have irrigation in all of Scenic Hudson Park and at the Nature Center, there's a need for a lot more maintenance and a lot more inspection. The irrigation system in Scenic Hudson Park was a great addition. We're in the process right now, because of your generosity, of putting a fertigation system into Scenic Hudson, which will allow us to care for the field much better, and the fertigation system will be able to be used for approved geese repellent. So we're going to be able to experiment a little bit with that too. The next, well, you tell me, because right now I know you've got a big thing at 8 o'clock, and I'd rather you to talk about.
So the day camp?
Day camp, yes. We've, for the first time ever, RPAC approved Maureen's request to offer sessions in the camp. So, whereas in the past you either signed up for 5 weeks or you didn't. It was all or nothing. We didn't prorate because everyone would want to prorate, and then it would have been difficult to maintain a staff. So this year you have the option of signing up for weeks 1, 2, and 3, or weeks 3, 4, and 5. So it's very, very difficult to know what our numbers are going to be. Our budget for day camp is based on having 250 kids. With 250 kids, the revenue that we will bring in will cover the cost of the camp. More than 225, although it doesn't mean just because you go 250, doesn't mean you have to hire more people right away. But there are some expenses, but you start getting to a point where this number we will know if this number is right in September. When camp is over, we will go back and look. If our revenue was low, we're obviously going to have spent less. This number can be adjusted at that time, okay? So, the 225, again, is based on 250 kids. And the scary part, and RPAC knew this, which is why in our fee scale, it's a little bit more than I think people would want for just 3 weeks. Because you can't hire a staff for 5 weeks, and if you don't get enough kids, tell them that you're not going to use them. And if we have 65 people on payroll and 2 of the weeks have less than 100 kids, what are we going to do? So a lot of planning and a lot of thinking is going into this. But the number you're looking at, both on the revenue side and the expense side, if we get the numbers that we're anticipating, day camp will come. I do not think we will end up spending that much, but I have to be prepared to have it. I'd rather give it back.
So
Okay?
is that the same for youth baseball and youth programs?
Yeah, you can look at the first page of the budget report, and you get a look at the projected revenues, and you can then go back and you can see it. And if I may, on the revenue, one of the new things we're putting in place is, do you see on that page how there are 12 things that are...
First computer page.
First computer page.
Yeah.
1 of 11. Okay? You see how there's actually 12 revenue-producing things? Well, every revenue report that we send up on June 1st will have one of these numbers correlated so that we can monitor the revenue on each of these much more readily and available. And that's why I said in September, we're going to be able to go to Brenda and say, hey, day camp has spent $200,000, what's my revenue? If she says more than $200,000, we're smiling and we know we've got money we're not going to spend in the budget. If it's less, we've got to go back and see what happens. So if you look at these, the day camp is probably the biggest increase, and youth programs is higher, both on the expense and on the revenue side. You can look at the detail on the youth program, because I think you'll get a better picture of why that number is so big when you see what makes it up.
So what page
If you,
The first computer page.
we're still on the first.
but if you, right.
You have a summary page yourself that you created?
The background's what I have. So if you, I'm trying to bring it to 7310, 498, which is recreation. It's on the bottom of the page that starts with youth
498
baseball.
is half a page, right?
Right, it's at the bottom.
Which page number? I'm sorry.
It's not a page number.
Oh, it's on your stuff.
Right.
Gotcha.
So, we're projecting spending $130,000 in this line, but we're also projecting a revenue of $175,000. And on there is a list of all of the programs we run, but just as an example, If you look at Music with Mark and Kitty Corner, almost every program in there has multiple sessions. So there could be, there's a fall one that runs from September to December. There's a one that starts in January and goes till April. Then there's a spring one. So, you know, if there are 20 programs here, they could equal 80 slots of programs. Okay?
You know, Joe, I would just comment, I know it was true when I was involved with rec, but sort of pound for pound in terms of the size of our programming in our department, we bring in a lot of revenue from other.
If we hit our, if we hit our number, which is always a challenge, I would still say that for a municipality without a swimming pool, okay, we bring in as much revenue as anyone in the county. But we run.
We offer a lot of programming.
We offer a lot, we sure do. And they're healthy, the programs, which is the best part about it, you know. I think the other thing that, you know, we've had to do is we've changed a lot. If you look at some of the things in there, you know, the adventure in architecture, you know, 10 years ago, you know, I wouldn't even have known what that meant. You know, you know, the cooking classes have become a major part of what we do. Hip hop, tap. I mean, you know, what the kids want has changed over the years, and Maureen's done a great job in finding staff who can lead those. And if you've never come to the ballet or the dance recital in June, and you really want to see something really cool, I'd urge you to go to that, because our programs are for everybody. We have kids in our dance class who, you know, who stand on the stage and they just do it because they get the fancy outfit, who don't know anything. They couldn't tell you, but they're there and they're smiling and getting their flowers from mom and dad at the end of the night. It's become something really, and the numbers are enormous for those programs.
So that's less exciting, but the rental of the senior center, that is going better, worse? How's that going?
Better, since RPAC looked at that again and asked me to loosen up a little bit, and one of the things that's really helped is we no longer just give you the choice of 4 hours. Now if you decide you want 5 hours, you pay extra, but you're able to hold a longer event. We've had very few problems with rentals. The biggest problem we've had with a rental is someone wants to use the nature center and wants to bring in a company that brings animals for petting, and our insurance company won't approve it because they're lacking something, their insurance. So just as an example, we've spent more hours on that, but there's a lot of people using the buildings, nature center, the senior center. You know, once we get into April and May, it'd probably be the exception if there was ever a full weekend where there wasn't at least one rental down there.
At one of the places.
At one of the places. Most times, in the busy time of the year, I would say between the two facilities, there's an average of at three parties a weekend.
So that's,
That's going well.
Early days of talking about that has come a long way.
The worry about the senior center, though, is, you know, now it's 20 years old. You know, things have to change, things have to get upgraded, and it's, you know, it's something we have to keep an eye on. But that said, too, if you go, you've all been down there. If you look at that building, you know, a 20-year-old building still looks pretty darn good.
So, yeah. So, I mean, I'm just looking because it's really about 78K without the mandatory personnel increases.
We have anyway.
And again, it's based, Mark, on unfortunately where we are in the budget now and where we still need to project 2 months of expenses. Like, I'm over budgeted in that parks labor line.
Yeah.
I can't stop using people. I just can't get the work done. So it means I know I'm going to keep spending there.
Well, I'm not even looking at that. I'm looking at the other numbers seem somewhat soft. I mean, in the sense that, soft meaning that for the camp, the youth baseball, the youth programs, you know, there's anywhere from $0 to $50,000 that's going to be needed based on revenue offsets. So, you know, if they're very popular, then you're not going to be looking at, the full $50,000 request, which is, oh, 50,
So just last senior center.
$54,000 request. No, I just corrected my number because I realized I rounded it, but
You want to talk about the celebrations, which is an $11,000 increase?
I was gonna ask about the one under at senior center part-time, but.
Well, we could do that next, but if you go to the detail, it's the 7550 line. It is after the page where the youth programs were.
It's on his,
It's on my paperwork, right.
yeah.
The request says 36,925, it's an increase of 11,425. So just running them down quickly, with the new rate for the police department and Brenda speaking to the chief, he anticipates a $500 increase and has asked us to budget $5,000 for July 4th this year. The park staff number is actually the same, so that's why it's only the increase from the police. The holiday greening of the village, we're requesting a $2,100 increase for that. And something new on this line is we've broken out the holiday happening event because it really needs its own budget. For those of you who are part of that day, you know what goes into it. I don't think it should be considered part of the greening of the village because it's leading up to an event and the event costs money. The performances, the singer, the refreshments. Now, we do get some of it back in donations from the fire department, but it was important, I think, to show you the difference in that day, that event has a cost to it. As you know, we've done a better job the past few years. We have an active head of the chamber who's put some life into things, and there's a group from the PTA who works closely with Karen from Larry's office and myself, and I think we've made the holiday happening at least start to come back to what it used to be. The next item is new, and that's really 5,000 of the 11,000. One of the things the public said to us at our meetings was, we want gathering places. We want more things to do. We want to be able to go to the park for more things. So at the tree lighting, I was standing next to the mayor, and I said, hey, maybe next year we're going to do this a little bit bigger and have a block party up here. And that led to, well, maybe we could do a concert. I actually love what we've done out here, what you guys have done out here. And I think it should be used more and get the public out here. So I started playing around with the idea of a concert. Greg Allen, at one of our department head meetings, said it actually was something that his board had discussed. And he asked if I'd be willing to work together, and I said I think it would be a great idea. So we've worked with them. This will be to close the street outside from Ferris Street up for a couple of hours, maybe 3 hours. It includes 2 police officers in that budget. The theater would provide the talent, and we would provide the setup, the maintenance, bring in a couple of food trucks. And we think it would be a really nice night. We're trying to do it either the weekend before July 4th or the weekend of July 4th. We just haven't come up with a date yet. The other reason I don't want to get too far with the date is if you tell me to make cuts, this would probably be an area where I would go and cut only because it's new.
Yeah, that was my question, because there's, or my observation, it's not really a question, that there's a lot of increases, a big overall increase in the budget. Clearly there was. And this, again, it's not a criticism of the number of balls you got in the air and then many unpredictabilities, but there's a lot of it. There was shortfall in the budget, and we were asking for more to make up for a shortfall, and here's a $5,000 brand new item.
Yep. Well, the one thing about it is I do think there is, close your ears. We think there's potential for funding and sponsorship, but having the time to go after that and to get it, if it's funded and we know we're going forward with it, we'll make every attempt to raise that 5,000. I just can't guarantee I can raise it, which is why it's in as a budget item, so that if you approve it, if we don't raise the money, we still know we can have it, but we would make a promise to try to do everything we can. The other items in here are really not things that you can change. I mean, on Memorial Day alone, just for the flowers, the band, and the audio, it's $3,400. Then you've got DPW that's got to come out with the sweeper in the morning and prepare that. And then you got 2 parks guys who have to come in, plus an extra DPW guy. It costs money to run these events. That's why I almost wish this wasn't in my budget, because it's really, but it is, so that's why it's in there, and it's an $11,000 increase. So, I'd ask you to think about the concert. I also think it's a really cool thing of the theater and the rec working together. It's one of the things that I think, we all in the village, under Larry's direction, as department heads, we've never communicated better and worked better, and what a nice thing to do to put something together. There's bigger thoughts in the future, because, phase 3 of the Matheson Park proposal that you'll get is to put a stage in the northern part of the park. And if we had a stage in the northern part of the park, we've already discussed with the theater partnering to do, some things where, hey, you guys, how about every Sunday you plan the activity in there? I'll put the maintenance in, I'll take care of that. I'm not too proud. I don't know what good music is, so, and I don't know talent on the screen or on stage. I don't have any shows like the men here, so, I think it'd be cool, again, to work with them to do that, so.
Well, we appreciate it. We'll consider this as we go forward. Connie, if I could go right there.
Yeah, I'll wrap up with Connie with the seniors.
Oh, yes.
If you turn to the next page, you can see, and again, this line was just not budgeted well. And again, to get you the number that we felt was the right one, we went in and tried to really give you as much detail as possible. We do provide bus transportation 52 weeks out of the year at a maximum of 28 hours a week. Bus drivers are paid $20 an hour. That's a $29,000 expense. We have a building person that works in there, same thing, 28 hours a week. That person, depending on who it is, can make anywhere from $12 an hour to $20 an hour. Right now, the person is at $16 an hour and is due an increase. So that is a ballpark, but there are also sometimes I need more than one person. So
the increase reflects, again, more hours, more people?
It's more hours, it's the same. I can't say it's the same position because it depends who's working. There's a possibility that at the end of July, Joan will be retiring. If she retires, then, I've got to rethink a lot of things, and I might need to bring more people in. Those numbers are basically guidelines and plans for me to try to stay within as I put staff in that building. It can change as days go by, but at least that's the number that I'm trying to fit everything in. Like, for example, tomorrow is the St. Patrick's Day luncheon. We have to bring in 3 or 4 additional people to help with that, and it gets charged to this line. Okay, again, it could be someone making $12 an hour, it could be someone making 18, but it depends what the event is. But it's necessary. The senior program requires people. Dr. Lonke and I had this conversation today. It's always been the sorest thumb on our hand that we've had difficulty running that one the right way, so.
Well, I think the comment is more that, it costs a lot of money to offer this service, but this is a service that we feel we need to offer.
Right.
And it's not that we're gonna make up revenue by charging the seniors
Yeah.
what it costs to run the senior program.
The other thing, and you've heard this before, the other thing about the senior citizen budget is, remember, they're carrying the brunt of the whole building, which just isn't their building. So all of the HVAC, the oil, the heating contracts, all of that stuff is in that budget. So they're carrying a big, that gets reflected in their number and nowhere else. So I'm available if anyone has questions. You want to email me if there's something you see when you go home. There is one typo, and it's on that page we're on right now, and I apologize for it. Under the part-time staff, that total number requested is supposed to read $65,328. The 8 was left out there.
Where is that?
It's on the senior citizen part-time. Yeah, I've got, it's supposed to be 328. It's a minor thing, but
328.
correct. There's something either of you No, you guys are good?
So one of the final thing, I was thinking about because of the grading program and flowers on the street. There was discussion, and I forgot where it went to, about replacing the containers and flower boxes. Is that being treated as a capital expense, or is that being treated?
Yes, there'll be a request to do that since they're looking at what is the styles and what they're going to ask you to consider, so. But it'll be one of the capital request items.
Okay.
As I'm sure will the garbage pails for Main Street, which is more of, I think, something that Greg is gonna take over with the ladies, because the needs, what they need is very different than what we need in the park. And fortunately for me, we've solved our issue in the park. We think we found a great can that they like, and my guys are very happy. I look forward to our discussion on the Matheson Park plan. I think it's very exciting. I think you will really like it, and I'm hoping that we can get support. As you know, the capital project, the 10-year look ahead, Matheson Park has been on it every year.
Exactly.
And it ends up getting pushed, so we're hoping it's hit the wall and
Might be the year.
it's time to make a decision, so. Thank you, thank both of you again very much, I appreciate it. Thank you to all the, yeah, me too.
You guys work hard. You have other things to do, but I appreciate that you came down to support.
Thank you, I've got some great ones. Have a good night.
Yeah, real quick. It'll be easy. Yeah, you're getting that right now.
Well, we have a salaries now that can go into safety inspections or to other work.
We're going to public safety, yes.
Public safety. No, again, here, public safety is the police department, and in there would also be safety.
Oh, I see.
This is pretty straightforward.
I'm sorry?
And it's not here.
No. No. So,
That's how we prevented the increase.
so really, from what you see on the cover sheet here, there are no requested increases. The only thing that's reflected here are the salaries that have been previously approved, which I think we've been through this numerous times in other departments. So the only thing that is really worth discussing is a quick overview, a little debrief session that Brenda and I had with Ed. And it relates to the level of building activity, so the revenue side of things, which is the first of the computer printed pages here. And the observation in looking at this is that our revenues current year are ahead of what our budget is, pretty significantly. But there were a couple of words of caution about that. One is we had some fairly large revenue that ended up in this particular year's revenue that were a one-time large project that came through related to the Ardsley Country Club. But the second part was more of the bigger picture, which is the economic activity, the building activity that Ed sees. And so in looking ahead, he cautioned that the level of activity he expected to decrease somewhat from where we are, the pace that we're on now. And all of this conversation excludes any activity on Marker Ridge. So the assumption is that we don't know when that's going to start. And you've probably heard us say that numerous times, but we don't know when there's going to be foundations in the ground. So there's no revenue assumption for that. And even then, that's a large project, essentially a one-time only project. So increasing an annual budget for 1 year, you then have to, that makes one, you have to decrease it. So, because things will come back to earth. So his recommendation is to keep the revenue projections the same. The slight decrease in activity that he sees, should bring the revenues in closer to what the budget is currently. So that was the recommendation there. So really no change, but there were a few moving parts involved. A few ups and downs,
But
right?
significant decreases from 16 and 17.
Yes.
Right, I mean, I remember Ed being here last year.
Mhm.
We did comment on that, the
Yeah.
decrease.
Yeah, and we increased our budget in those years to try to capture some of that extra activity. But all along the way, he's been pretty cautious about things that, it's going to start running out. And he sees a decline in the amount of activity going on. That's the general theme that he sees.
Just recently.
Right now, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. I wouldn't say just in the last
Well,
couple of months, but over the past, say 6 months or so. So,
That's an easy one.
all right? Yeah.
And everything else is zero.
Yeah.
So this is passing, I'd like to get together with you and Ed and Rick to talk about the issues of going all electronic on
Sure.
for the boards, and maybe also Pat.
Okay.
So I'm gonna need help getting that set up, because I've talked to them independently.
So I'll pull them all together.
It doesn't affect our budget, but it affects people who are submitting stuff.
If it's okay, we're maybe 5 minutes ahead of schedule here. Can I sneak in that one extra item that I knew about, so we don't have to do it at 10 o'clock tonight? Okay, so just a quick background on this. We received some preliminary designs on how the handicap access on the Main Street corner is going to be designed and handled. So the preliminary designs that we saw, because of the challenging grades and trying to marry those grades with ADA compliance and the need for certain level landings and such, caused the corners to be unusually designed. And frankly, maybe that's a euphemism.
Picture you sent us.
Yeah, and so it was tough to imagine that this is actually an improvement when you look at this. And in fact, we're spending a lot of money, and it's a lot of federal money, to get ADA compliance, but yet crosswalks were headed in all different directions. I'm not sure how that helps a visually impaired person.
Those pictures were good.
Yeah, so we went back and met out on site again with the engineers, really spent some time studying the grades and the possibilities, and one of the conclusions we came to is that the,
We each get two, there's two.
there's two separate. There were set.
It's only Cookie and the one that.
Yeah.
They got two ones,
That's
one straight, one wrong.
No, not really. So one of the conclusions that we came to when we were out in the field is that if there were more width to the sidewalks, that the design could have enough elbow room to take on a more normal pattern. And so we went back and explored the idea of, well, if we're going to be redoing these corners, let's see what would be involved in building our bump outs, curb extensions, whatever you want to call them, sidewalk extensions, which effectively narrow the width of the crossing, narrow the length of the crossing, but create state to work with. And so the second drawing that you have there does in fact reflect those bump outs. And this, as you remember, was a pretty talked about element of the streetscape plan, the Main Street streetscape plan. They called them bulb outs, I think, those particular designers. And but what it does is it allows these intersections to be more uniform and frankly work a lot better. So I had sent you a kind of a list of pros and cons, just trying to identify some of the issues, and certainly one one of the issues, although there's a positive in terms of the layout, one of the issues is it does take away some parking spaces. I think the estimate is about 25 parking spaces up along the length of Main Street. But on the flip side of that, something that I think I had mentioned at a previous meeting is that, frankly, many of the spaces, we have many places where parking spaces go right up against crosswalks, making any chance for visibility of a pedestrian basically nil. Yeah, right. Even the most agile motorist and agile pedestrian, you can't see someone trying to cross. So then, essentially so this would eliminate that and help that situation.
So also, I know in the past we talked about restriping, and we talked about to shift some of the parking spaces around might actually get you back something, a few that you're losing. But the other thing is, if we are looking at restrictions on large vehicle parking as well at the corners, this actually helps us out because you can't do it.
Nobody can park there.
We sort of save a regulation on that, but.
True, yeah.
The thing I was wondering about is, do we actually have to do this on both sides of every intersection?
Right,
That's the only thing I could see that is a potential, way of gathering back a couple of parking spots here and there. If we had less frequently crossed intersections, only have one improved across Main, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because I assume the ones going east-west problematic, or is it just the north in terms of?
It's the ones, the crossings across Main Street are
That's
primarily the problematic ones.
Yeah.
This one's a problem too.
There are other problems on some of the side streets, but they're less of an issue.
So can I just ask, I wasn't here when the streetscape project was done. I do remember reading about it in the paper, but I'm wondering how much of public input there was and how much public knowledge there is about these bulb outs. I'm only concerned that I've been to communities where it's been voted to make changes and then the people see what it actually looks like and they're not happy. They see what they've lost and they see how things have changed. And I'm a little leery about making a change like this without there being perhaps a little more public input.
Well, it was quite a bit at the time, and people were pretty favorable. I mean, the major pushback that I recall was just turning radiuses of trucks and
Right.
service equipment.
But we've basically, we feel that we've solved that issue because the angle of the curb is identical to the angle of the curb up at the War Memorials, which is also identical to the one here at Town Hall. So the in and out of the side streets, we think we've solved with the radius that we're using. So that part, engineering wise, we're good.
Yeah, Larry, I was pretty heavily involved in that, and there were, I'm gonna say 3 public sessions, and they were online, they were videoed. And the people who were on the committee, I'm gonna say there were 12, maybe individuals who, from all different kind of walks of life. And then the final form of that, stayed online, and I think it is actually still online. You can,
Yeah, there's some of the old histories
there's a
there.
way of searching and seeing the whole plan. So, since then, there's been a lot more discussion about the pedestrian safety. That was brought up at the time, but with the traffic committee and all that, that became an even, obviously, very public discussion about the safety. So they were thinking about the safety issue at the time, and they were thinking of meaning the group and the consultants. And obviously the issue of lost parking was a big concern. Of course it's a concern. But I guess since then, the more there's been attention on the incredible problems with pedestrian safety on these streets, the public has gotten really engaged, and I think it's a really important thing. And now, when you try it out at Ferris Street, you see the difference. You see it's shorter, and you can get out there, and so I think they're quite effective, and I think, in answer to your question about public input.
So what's the rollout plan? Like, is it like now, I mean, this is Buck out here, and we've
I just gave you an example, but.
Right, yeah, I was curious, like, we've obviously tried two, like this, town hall and where the.
Well, there's no more plan for, apart from this project here, there was no plan, there's no separate project to install bump outs on any of the other intersections except for this opportunity.
Right, but this is just Buck out? Or this
No,
is?
This is, no, this is,
Ferris.
yeah,
That's what I'm saying. Are we
there's a
not
total
saying
of six intersections. So it's, if you want me to name them, I can. But it's
ABC.
Buckout, Continent, Dutcher, Ecker, Ferris, and not Grinnell, Dearman.
I like Mark's point though before, does it, if we can make it on one side of the street?
Right, I think in some cases, maybe, in other cases, maybe not.
Yeah, but to the
But
extent,
something
but
to
to
look
the,
at. That's-
Right,
yeah,
sure.
to the extent that it could work, you might, it's the balance
Yeah.
of, preserving as much parking as possible, and if somebody has to make one small cross on the cross street to get on a bump out to be safely
Right.
cross Main Street, that's the balance.
So, I just wanted to follow on with what Connie was saying and then add another question. But the other obvious thing, it's not just pedestrian safety in terms of visibility, but these narrowing of the road bed tends to slow people down as
Right.
well.
Right.
So
Which was
there's
discussed.
traffic calming impact of that, even if you're going downhill.
Which was discussed during the streetscape
Exactly.
plan.
I just wanted to bring that out.
Yep, it was identified as a traffic calming measure, actually, yeah.
But
So-
and on top of that, that the person the driver who can't come out of the side street because of the vehicle that's in the way, so you're,
Right, visibility enhancement.
your visibility,
Yeah.
so that's both, the fender bender accident or the pedestrian
So this could
accident.
solve a lot of those kinds
It's-
of corner
yeah.
problems that we've been sort of
So,
I did have one other question. Was there any, I think I know the answer, but I'm gonna ask anyways, the crosswalks that are across Main, were they going to be done in a style or just painted? By in a style, I mean like the Aqueduct crossing.
Right, so we have funding for two of the crossings, I believe it's Dutcher and Ecker.
Two pairs?
No, not two pairs, only two, one pair of crossings, one at one street and one at another. We have funding from the dormitory authority from the state and municipal funding from New York State to do brick crossings at those crossings. The rest will be painted, unless you feel like putting more money out, but that's not currently on the
Speaking
plan.
of money, how much more is it gonna run to do this versus the original?
$300,000.
And what percentage is that over what the original?
Well, the entire project, which includes Station Road, is $1,000,001, another 120, about $1,300,000. But I think the point about the money, and I wasn't at all minimizing the money. That was actually, frankly, where I thought the focus was going to be on this tonight. But is that if you redo these corners, to then do bump outs at a future date, if you decide down the road that you want to do that, it's wasteful, frankly. So
So we should
it's
decide
an
this-
opportunity to look
we need
at,
to
yeah.
decide
Do enhance.
in other words, we have the
Crosswalks.
grant to do part of it, but to do it right,
We
and
have-
not have these crooked things that don't really work right.
Correct, and to achieve the bump outs as
The,
well, yeah.
the investment is about $300,000.
But that would be if we did them on both sides
Yes,
of all the corners.
yeah, it would be
So-
less,
I think
obviously,
we can-
yeah.
Right, so if we decide that doesn't need to be on every single corner, that would
Right.
reduce the cost.
Yeah, I can look at that.
Okay.
So, just for my clarification, how much of the ADA grant is there matching from the village on that, or is that straight out from the feds? Whatever the number,
There's plenty of match from the village because the ADA, the Main Street ADA grant, because it's being administered as a federal project, doesn't nearly cover the cost of redoing these corners. So there's already a match. Now, that gets combined with the money for Station Road, where there is enough funds for, so it's all being looked at as one big project. Right now, we're in the ballpark in terms of budget. Forget about this, we're in the ballpark as far as budget goes, for both projects, Station Road and Main Street. This would be in addition to that. But the money strictly that was set aside for Main Street was never really enough. In fact, if we hadn't combined these two projects, if we hadn't gotten the Station Road money, the money for the corrections on the ADA curbs here on Main Street probably would have been given back. We couldn't have done it. We've been through this before in a different setting, but we've talked about this. It's ridiculous.
I think it makes perfect sense. We'll just please explore.
Yeah.
But for all of the reasons you outlined, it's safer, it calms traffic, it's ADA compliant, and it's much better for pedestrian visibility.
What I'll do is I'll look at the corners. I'll gather some additional information on the streetscape and the public process that was involved, and I'll come back on Monday night with some answers. And if you feel like you can make a decision, that's great. If you can't, that's fine too. We'll,
And how you envision it? I mean, the funding would be a capital project, or would it be a? Yeah. Obviously,
yeah. And I mean, there are also funds available through that same state and municipal funding on an annual basis, but that would take a little time to explore with our Assemblyman Avenatti. So, that there's no guarantees there, but certainly.
If it came, if it got covered by a grant and we had.
It would be partially. Yeah, I think the best we can do is partially cover it.
Yeah.
But those SAM monies that are available are typically 120 to 150, so we could potentially cover half if we, but it's going to take a little time to work through the system.
And investment in safety and
We keep talking about one of the
it's.
pedestrian safety, this is a tangible.
I mean, how do you put a dollar on that?
Okay, thanks. I'm going to move down here because I want to kind of hook up to the screen. Figure out. I don't think it matters.
So it's time to review the proposal by Astor Buck for a parking lot adjacent to 50 South Buckhouse Street.
I can do this too. Back to
Let's see. No, sorry.
So, this is the first time that, we're seeing this proposal, so I will just turn it over to you to drive and walk us through it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
What's this?
What's Larry here? Was that?
No, I'm just trying to see where it's removable.
The three of us have to make an angle here. Okay, thanks.
So fine. Let me take that off the screen just right now.
One file says,
I'll just drag it to the desktop. It's, sorry, well, yeah, here. This is one. Yeah.
One is a feature.
Did you get a copy of this?
I didn't get a printed copy. Larry sent me an email.
I'm not sure.
It's a lot shot at night.
Dark sky. Dark sky, sorry.
Thank you, Larry. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. My name is Andrew Tung from Divinity Tung Schwalbe, here tonight with Bill Thompson from Astor Buck, and thank you for seeing us this evening. When we last met with you last year, we presented a parking study and a parking lot on the parcels to the south of the Trent building, and the objective of the parking study was to show, hopefully, that there would be a benefit to both the property and to the surrounding area from the provision of, at that time, 49 parking spaces in a new on-grade lot south of the Trent building. We believed that both in terms of providing additional parking for the tenants, current and future, and taking potentially spaces off the street in the surrounding area from people who were going to the building but would not be able to park on site, would be then parking on the street, and that would free up some space in the neighborhood. And that would be done without changing the traffic volumes to the site, or the traffic circulation. It would still continue in the same manner it continues or it exists today. And we had worked with your board and the village administrator for several months prior to adjust the landscape plan and the grading of the site such that, and the layout of the site such that the spaces themselves would be 10 feet below South Buckout, so it wouldn't be visible in most instances. At that meeting, from both your comments and the comments of the public, it was apparent to us that the benefit that we believed would be provided was not compelling in terms of was from the meeting. And so we stepped back and have in the interim since been exploring different ideas as to how we might incorporate other benefits into this project such that we might provide a small amount of parking and something else while still perhaps achieving both objectives, benefits to the area and the village, and also the additional parking off-site, or rather on-site, which we believe important to the long-term health of the building. And so in coordination with the village administrator and other officials, what we've come up with and wanted to speak to you this evening informally about was the idea of this property providing some parcel of land for use in creating affordable housing at this location in conjunction with a smaller parking lot. And in order to do that, there are several steps to get to that end product and a series of approvals that would be needed by both the village board, or rather from the village board and the planning board. And so I have these three diagrams here that kind of illustrate current conditions, what would have to happen as a precursor to any site plan, and then a conceptual site plan. So I'd like to step through those with you. This first figure is just the property and zoning map as it is today, color-coded to show in green the properties owned by Stanford Bridge and Hudson Gray that make up the Astor Buck total holding. The darker green on the bottom left is the Hudson Gray parcel with frontage that the parking lot has been shown on up to this point. In blue is the Village of Arlington parcel, a small or 3,000 square foot parcel that is intervening between the Hudson Ray parcel and the Trent building, and has been shown in the parking lot plans, but it had been left unstated as to how exactly that use of that property would be achieved. And so we're part of this concept is to address that issue. How does that become part of the project? The next slide. In terms of providing affordable housing, what we thought basically is that land for the affordable housing would be put at the southern portion of the property. If you go to the second one, first, Larry.
Go back.
No, go back one. Go back one. Yeah.
Apologize.
So this diagram, which is slightly different than the first, shows 3 steps that would have to happen as a precursor to providing both affordable housing and a smaller parking lot. They don't have to happen in a particular order, they just have to happen before a site plan could go forward. So the first proposal would be that both parcels to the south of the Trent building, both the village parcel and the Hudson Gray parcel, be rezoned from 1F5 to 2F. The 2F does 2 things. One, it allows for accessory parking, surface parking to be built that would be adjunct to the Trent building. And secondly, it allows for 2-family residences to be built in the same lot as a 1F5 residence on a 5,000 square foot lot. The second component of this, the second step here, would be for the Hudson Gray parcel to be subdivided, that is, to cut into 2, the line being right where the dash in 2F is, between the green and the blue. Let's see if this doesn't really work. Creating a 7,500 square foot parcel on the south, and the remaining portion of that Hudson Gray parcel is 10,400 square feet. The third component then would be to facilitate an exchange of the smaller village parcel to the north with the new Hudson Gray parcel at the south, so that at the end of these 3 steps, there would be conceivably a blue village parcel at the south of 7,500 square feet and a consolidated Hudson Gray parcel of an addition of 3,300 square feet, and the balance of the central parcel on which that parking lot or a smaller parking lot could be proposed. So with those 3 components, 2 of which are village board actions, and the rezoning and the land exchange, and one of which is a planning board action, the subdivision of the existing Hudson Gray parcel, then the pieces would be in place, if you will, so that a site plan for both parcels or further action could be considered for both parcels. And that's illustrated on the third figure.
So the subdivision, that's the second step?
Yes.
And that would be a planning board action?
Yes.
Which would be this board?
That's correct. It could happen simultaneously, but the agencies with jurisdiction.
Not in that order, but
that's correct.
Right, okay,
Right.
thank you.
So all those things have to happen before we could propose, for instance, a smaller parking lot, as is shown here on the right side.
Although the subdivision does have to happen before the land swap.
Yes. Yes, before the...
2 has to happen before 3.
Right. That's right. So what we see here is a concept plan for a smaller parking lot on the right and a possible 4-unit affordable housing development on the left. The parking lot is similar in layout to the earlier parking lots, only shorter. It is, as opposed to 49 spaces, it has 35 spaces. They're still set about 10 feet below the level of South Buckout because they're accessed via the existing Trent building driveway, which, as you leave South Buckout, slopes down towards the west. And a similar layout and similar landscaping around all sides of that parking lot. To the south, utilizing the provisions of the village's fair and affordable housing statute, adjusted somewhat, and I'll get to that in a moment. We've shown up to 4 affordable units in 2 duplex buildings that would share a common center wall. And they're laid out here as in a 20 by 40 footprint, so the ground floor would be 800 square feet, and the second floor would be 800 square feet. And that would be on both sides. You have 2 and 2 potential for 4 units. The affordable housing provisions as they stand today, as I read them, apply to a proposed site plan or subdivision and require that if you have more than 5 units proposed, you are obligated to have a certain percentage of those be a fair and affordable housing unit. This would not be a larger subdivision, and it would not have other market rate units. So I think that you need to determine that could be applied to a standalone affordable housing project, or there could be certainly adjustments made so that it could apply to a standalone affordable housing project. And so Astorbuck is not a residential developer, and so that what they would do is they would offer this land to the village for its either construction or to put it out to RFP so that it could be constructed in a manner that would be appropriate and fit with your plans for provision of affordable housing. What this does do with the shifting or just having the parking lot on the north side of the site is that on the south side of the site now there will be residential units similar to the residential units that are there today. The width, you can see, as you see in this image, it's about the same width as the second one from the bottom left, a little bit wider across than the other units that are in view, but it could certainly be designed to look like a single-family home, 2 stories and 40 feet wide across the front. As I've illustrated here, but there may be other architectural ways that can be handled. So the parking lot is at the north end. It only faces one house across South Buckout, and it would be landscaped on all sides. And so with that, having gotten to this point, we thought we'd come to visit with you and see if you had any questions or whether this was of interest to follow up on.
You didn't talk about the sidewalk issues and any of that. Do you want to go through that? I mean, some of that you have.
Yes. We've proposed to include the sidewalk along the full South Buckout frontage in front of both the residential lots. That would be part of the parking lot. The parking lot would also have that in front, and so we could continue that across the full frontage of these parcels.
And in previous incarnations, you also had additional additives to the street and to the sidewalks, further down. Remember, there was some separation of Buckout Street north of Station Road. Right.
That wouldn't do
Is
that.
that all still part of the?
That wouldn't be part of this project. That would be phase 2, which we would do with facade improvements to the 50 South Buckout building.
This was like a medium between, within the, if I recall.
That was October 27th.
So, Bill, I'm sorry, phase 2 would be,
The 50 South Buckout building,
okay.
we want to redo the facade of that, the one that faces Buckout where the loading docks are
Yeah, right.
and all that. That's,
So you wouldn't want to put in sidewalks until you were doing that? I mean, it wouldn't make sense.
doesn't make sense to do it, yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the problems with taking out all the parking spaces in front of the 50 South Buckout building for construction and not yet having these spaces in service is you create just a phasing problem with parking, so.
That would create a real parking problem.
Yeah, exactly.
The circulation for the parking lot, it goes in here, and then does it all go out down below?
It does. It's
So it doesn't
clockwise.
exit out on.
That's right. It's one way in, and then you go around out to the north. And that's the same way that the lot would be accessed. You'd come in from South Buckeye, go into the lot, and then to exit, you go down around the building and go out the north end.
I think reached out to the county affordable housing folks. Have we heard back on feasibility of 4
Well-
units?
Yeah, I mean, that answer is gonna take a little bit of time, partly because, you know, this concept is being discussed here really for the first time, but I think the very high-level discussions that I had about a 7,500 square foot parcel with the potential for 4 units on it is that while it's challenging, you know, it's just, you have to find the right developer, you have to find the right nonprofit to work with, essentially, is what I was told. So I would, you know, if this is something that is being pursued, we would certainly have discussions with the right people to figure out how to best get this developed.
It's a little premature at this point.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna have final answers on anything, of course, because, you know, we're way too early in this, but again, just the concept of not that this is a completely level lot, we know it's not, but you know, a lot of it depends on how challenging it is to develop it and who's interested in doing 4 units.
So that becomes our job. I mean, if this were to happen, the village itself, it's not like someone else's, we have to find the appropriate people to develop it because you guys aren't developing it that way. There's a land swap, and if this were to happen, there'd be a land swap, and there'd be a site plan, and then we would be the developers in the sense of those units.
Well, we can structure things any way we
Yeah.
want with any level of involvement. You know, there's communities that have very active volunteer housing committees that look out, yeah, exactly, that
Well,
look
they
to.
develop on small, they
They
develop
do,
several,
yeah.
1 and 2, you know.
Right,
1 and
right.
2
And,
houses.
and so in that case, the village actually isn't all that involved. I mean, they probably assist when they can, but they're not terribly involved. In other places, I mean, you know, when the Burnham building was developed 20 years ago, we were intimately involved in that. It wasn't our money developing it, the village's money, but we were, you know, we were really tied into the success of that project.
There's lots of tax credits and grants and, you know, federal money for this that we don't know how to get. You know, we don't do that. But there are guys that's highly specialized that they know where to get all the pieces of free money, which makes it workable for them.
I think our new workforce group for Burnham, those investors, you know,
Yeah, they know
we're
that.
dealing with that same
Well,
thing.
I mean, I think Andrew mentioned it in his presentation that maybe an RFP is in order to find the right developer for the right situation. You know, but that's something that if it's presented to you, will be an interesting project to work on.
But from your point of view, this piece will not be something to be working on. What you want to end, from your point of view, what you want to end with is you've done a land swap, you've gotten the change in zoning, and you can go ahead with a parking lot a little much smaller than the initial proposal.
That's correct.
And the sidewalk.
And the sidewalk.
And the sidewalk, sorry.
And the sidewalk.
And you mean, I don't know how it will work out, but I imagine to do the grading and to build the retaining wall, I don't think that just stops at the corner at the end of our property. I can't imagine that's how it would end up. It doesn't make sense to me. So I'm sure there'd be additional work on our side done on that backside of the lot. I think it would
I'm
have
not
to be.
sure I know what you mean. You mean, if Andrew was pointing you with the.
My pointer doesn't work very well. But I think what Bill's saying is that in the creation of the parking lot, there's a retaining wall at the end, and there may be some grading that could be done on the site to the south. So it could be some early site work to help create that lot.
Right.
So in terms of these 32, it's 32 spaces and 3 tandem, meaning somebody parks and they know they can't get out, right? That's what a tandem.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Like same
Right.
company people.
Right, somebody's gonna come there, stay there, right? In terms of the size of those spots, are they different from the original sizes for an individual car? Are they the same?
We had originally proposed 9-foot wide spaces, which are fairly standard industry-wide. Your village has a definite calls for 9'6" by 20 foot, which is larger than I've seen anywhere else, certainly in the county. What we would propose, and there is a provision in your stormwater management section as in a listing of green infrastructure measures that in order to reduce impervious area, that parking spaces are encouraged to be smaller when possible. The city of White Plains, for instance, has two different widths of parking spaces, 8'6" and 8 feet. The 8'6" they call full spaces, and the 8 feet they call standard spaces. And they ask for 25% full, that's 8'6", and 75% 8 foot wide. So, especially particularly in a longer term parking situation, such as an office building where you generally park once or maybe twice during the day, and people know other people that are going to park there, as opposed to going to the shopping center or something like that, where you may only go once. The spaces can be narrower because people are a little bit more careful when they park.
But Andrew, what are these 32?
These are 8'6".
8'6"?
8'6", and we would seek your, either through the village board or the planning board, or whatever is deemed appropriate, your permission or your relief, or in some manner seek to reduce the number of spaces. The goal is to provide enough spaces for the building to make this worthwhile. If we only have 5 spaces, then the project doesn't work. Or that's just, there's not 5 spaces, but that's at some point. And,
right, that's a critical number.
Yeah.
So what kind of green infrastructure would there be in the parking lot?
Well, there's still, as previously proposed, there's an underground pervious strip by which the water gets to a cistern below the surface. And should there be soil in this location that would percolate, that water will infiltrate into the ground. If not, it would be held and weeded out such that the requirements of your stormwater code in terms of no increase in peak flow and peak rate of runoff.
So no real green infrastructure, but stormwater management, which you have to have no matter what.
That's correct. That's correct.
Now, phase 2, that's a completely separate project, right? So the approval process for this would not be contingent upon you going ahead with phase 2, or?
Well, I don't imagine we'd move forward with phase 2 if we can't get this done.
No, right, but getting, I'm asking it the other way,
Yeah.
getting this, would that commit you to phase 2?
Yeah, talk to my partners, but I think it would, yes.
Well, Janice, we can do it. We can, I mean, if one of the requirements before you did the land swap, before you approved the whole project, you did the land swap, you did the rezoning, is to have a commitment from them that they will do these sidewalk improvements, and you can require a bond.
Okay.
That would, so let's say it would cost $100,000. You would require them to post a bond for that amount in case they didn't go forward, you could get somebody else to do it.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, I would just say in general terms, I think, Andrew, when you said that the original traffic study was not compelling, I think we all agree with that.
Yes.
I also find the idea of finding a space to, possibly have affordable housing in the village, but that's such a difficult thing to find in the first place, also compelling. So something that I'd be interested in learning more about, certainly hearing what the planning board has to say about it as well. But I find this interesting.
Yes.
It certainly our efforts over the last several years about affordable housing, with the Affordable Housing Committee, and a great deal of talk about it, and still the new code pieces we put in the.
As well as our comprehensive plan.
Yes, of course, yes, the comprehensive plan. This was a high priority to increase that, and so that there is a compelling need for that. I think the whole community knows that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about, having a high bar for changing zoning, so, what's in it for us is actually the question we were asking. So I think that, swapping, basically doubling the size of our land to potentially develop affordable housing is something that, I think we'll have to at least seriously consider.
Right.
And see if it's feasible and that sort of thing. But I think it's a creative plan. It's not just, it's definitely thinking outside the box. It's not something I would have thought of necessarily, so.
Yeah, who's brought it in? That's a very good idea. It keeps the placement of the affordable housing, it's residences in a residential area. I understand it's rezoning, but you're houses with houses, not parking lots across from houses.
So the parking lot, of course, does jut out here in front of several of this house here. I guess taking up Larry's point about the lack of compelling nature of this traffic study, I'm trying to remember the number of spaces that seemed to be available within, when the traffic study, not the traffic, but the total number of spaces that were available already to you. It was something like 17 or 20 or something like that. When we looked at the available spaces that were needed on particular days, I remember we could look at John Canning's report that day. He talked about how many spaces they found empty and unused. And it seems to me a smaller parking lot helps the need, but there wasn't an overwhelming need for a large parking lot. There seemed to be some need for some smaller amount, but not a large amount. So I'm just thinking, I would have to go back and listen to his whole report, but I think that's what you were talking about when John Canning.
I remember like around 15, but
Yeah, 15, yeah.
Something in that
Yeah,
area.
okay, all right, I wasn't so
As a point of information, I don't remember the exact number either, but in terms of the parking supply that's there today, the building is about 166,000 square feet. And between the spaces that they have on site and the spaces that they lease from Metro North, they control 144 spaces, which is a little bit less than one space per 1,000 square feet. If this building were to be built today, the village regulations would require 5 per 1,000 for non-medical office use. So they have 1 per 1,000, village, which, and I believe the village regulations, as many regulations, is excessive. But still, there's a dramatic difference from there. And so part of the reason for the proposal is to try to reduce that difference.
Well, great. I mean, I think we have a lot to.
Brian, maybe process-wise, because we've gotten some emails, I might just explain it.
Sure.
Assuming what would happen, assuming the board was interested in this.
Yeah, I think that's the first step, obviously, is.
Yeah, assuming you guys were interested, and this is, I think, would address some of the emails you got, then I think that the best thing would be for Astorbuck to submit a new petition, because their old petition asked to rezone a business, so this is really a whole different thing, so re-business. And and once they did that, then the board of trustees, if you were interested in it, would schedule a public hearing. At that point, the recommendation would be sent to the planning board, and for the planning board's report. And the public hearing would need to be published in the newspaper, and it'd be posted online. The code doesn't require neighbors to be notified, but I think in the past, on these projects, you'd have to set them. Then they did submit a really extensive environmental assessment form back in 2015, but that's outdated, and the project's changed, and some of the impacts will change because it's a different proposal. So they would then have to submit another long form EAF, and along with the EAF, they submitted several studies. I think not all that the board wanted, but I would say along with their EAF, they'd have to submit an updated traffic and circulation study, a stormwater and drainage analysis, a detailed lighting plan, and visual depictions of how it looks from the north, the south, the east, the west. And then probably not the visual depictions, but they would submit it by their engineers, their traffic engineers. Then those studies, analyses would be reviewed by the village's consultants, the village's engineer, and the traffic person that we might retain. And that would be the process. So essentially, going through the process again with the new petition.
So what would be the first time that we would have any public hearing then? Would it have to come after the full set of submissions,
Well, yeah, after they submit a petition.
but not all the other
Oh, no, yeah,
environmental form updates?
correct.
Good, well, I think
And then, I'm sorry, Brian, one other thing is that the secret we would have to think about, because it's kind of depends, because there's two things going on. There's the parking lot development, and then there's also the development of the two affordable houses. So we have to be, careful about how it's all handled, but
Figure it out.
it'll work, yeah.
I mean, I think we have a lot to digest, and, I know we're ready to discuss it on Monday, so we might need some background information from the county and others, but, we can, maybe in the next work session, but we can figure it out, on the way.
Can I just make one comment on this? I don't want to get too far ahead, but there's a discrepancy here in what's being presented in that the first subdivision map shows 2 lots being created. However, the final plan shows 3 lots being created. Now, those 3 lots, the 2 housing lots, are substandard for the 2F zone. They don't meet minimum lot size. The way they're presented here, they don't meet front yard setback, side yard setback, or rear yard setback. So before you start getting into this, I think this needs to be clearly laid out, because I don't believe they can subdivide that into 3 lots. They haven't I don't believe they've applied the resource protection requirement to this lot. And I went ahead and did some calculations on it. The most you can get on this parcel is 2 lots under resource protection. So what's being proposed here does not meet the requirements of the subdivision ordinance. So I think they better go back and take a look a little bit more closely at what they're proposing here.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all part of the, is this feasible, what we have for now.
And that doesn't even get to the constructability of what's being proposed here. But you've got you've got slopes on this property that are greater than 50%. On almost half of it. You've also got an easement that is not being totally shown on here. That easement would also come out of the resource protection requirement. So that's got to be shown on the final plan here that they're going to submit. They're just showing a water and sewer and gas line, but they don't show what the width of that easement is. And I understand that there is an easement on that property, and that easement runs due west towards the apartment building, then makes a sharp right turn and goes north along the back of the property line, and then heads west into the northeast corner of the apartment building. So there's a 20-foot easement, I believe, that those lines are in, and that has to be shown on the site plan. And that would come out of any buildable lot.
Right.
Right. So, yeah, I think they better go back and do a little bit more homework on this before they submit it.
Yeah, I think that's part of the whole, is this plan feasible? I think we can come up with a list of questions between your board and our board.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Neighbors are going to say.
You did, thank you. You're doing
Let's talk after, with Mary Ann.
Next up is discussion of the proposed local law amending the Irvington zoning code to permit short-term rentals. The 30-second version of the background here is we had our first public hearing last meeting. We received a bunch of feedback. We had some time to digest some of the feedback, and now we can discuss. Yeah.
Oh, you know what I did? I went through the various letters and I've made a list of what the issues are. I'm going through this will be faster. It's really shorthand, but I think you'll all understand what it is.
Good, you got everything that... No, I'm glad you got everything that was making sense.
Yeah, I was making notes during the oral comments and then I went through the Apollo letters.
Yeah. My summary was, I thought that to me, the overwhelming response, well, it was about 70-30 in favor of allowing them in some form. And then the 70 that said we should allow them in some form, I'd say 80% of them said we really should regulate it less.
Unlimited.
Somewhere between what we're doing and unlimited. I think that the biggest complaint or suggestion was that 30 was too few. And I think that, and 90 days was too short. I think that was probably the recurring themes of the pro.
What was the 30 you're talking about?
30
registrations.
Oh, 30, not days, 30 registrations was too few.
Too few. And to me, that to me is.
That's soft.
That was, we threw out a number to see, see what people thought. So to me, that's, again, people say, well, where'd you get that number from? We literally made up that number. I think some of it was based on the accessible apartment law, accessory apartment law, that was 50. But I honestly think.
One application.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I think that, that number, maybe we make it just 50 to match the other one, maybe we say 30 in the downtown or the historic district and 20 outside, to me, that number is something we can play with and tweak. I think.
Well, yeah, that's what we would,
But I
thought
think
that's what we were gonna do
I think
now,
so.
and then
I
I'll
think so,
rewrite it, yeah.
I mean, to me, 30 is too low, I would say.
Yes, given the interest.
Right now?
Yeah, sure, we start at the top, 90 days too short, we'll start there.
You want to do?
Well, why don't we do the 30 days since we're on
That's
it?
what I'm talking about.
I like the consistency of 50.
Yeah, I like
the other laws, so.
There's probably 50 on
And I gotta tell
online
you-
already, so we might as well go.
And if suddenly there's 50 applications, we can look at this
Change it.
kind of right away.
Right, that's,
I see that it's kind of noise level, that you could change it, that's pretty quickly.
Yeah, that would be an easy change, okay, so I'll take this, okay.
So that's an easy one.
now that now,
I
now.
know
90
you
days
did
too
it.
short?
I really don't see what the point of regulating the number of days or the number of weekends. I just think that we're being overly cautious, but, the majority of people, am I speaking too soft?
No.
Yes.
No, I'm scratching my head.
It's getting sensitive, we gotta keep telling him that.
Yeah.
Speak up.
I tend to get quieter. The majority, I think the vast majority of people who are in favor of it, who are really making a good case that unless they, I hate to use the word, say, free rein, but unless it's fairly unlimited, they can't necessarily make a survivability case on it. If they're really trying to augment their mortgage, like they're the sole owner of the house now in a divorce situation or something like that they really need to have more freedom in order to be able to continue to stay in their house. So I'm not sure what we're trying to protect.
Yeah, well, I have an idea what we're trying to protect, and that's what I was like, this, like so many other things we address, I think fundamentally comes down to an issue of balance. And the people who oppose this were largely saying, hey, this is a residential family town. We're not a college town, we're not a vacation, this isn't the Hamptons, this is primarily residential community. And that there was some feeling that we don't want to feel that every single day of the year, there could be people renting it for as short as 3 days or very few days at a time with a constant turnover. So I'm not saying where the line is, but I think we should.
Well, one example, and I understand what you're saying, one example people brought up were people that were up for the quarter, for a semester or for a quarter, and.
Go ahead.
Well, there is the border regulation, which is basically very little regulation whatsoever. It just says you can rent one room of your house out, and that's that, and no control. As long as you're in that one F zone.
Right. So the students, the people who are here for some kind of internship, the people who are staying for the summer, that could easily.
But not if they're married.
A border.
A border.
They can be married.
No, it doesn't say a boarder, it says the renting out of one room. They're allowed the renting out of one room.
It doesn't mean one person.
Right. So the word border isn't used, that they're renting
Call
out
it
of
that.
one
We
room.
just call it that, yeah.
So that could take care of those longer term.
Right.
And I'm not sure people are actually thinking straight. I mean, I would stop and hesitate thinking about renting my entire house out for, 6 months at a time. I don't think that.
Well, the funny thing is, it's more than 30 days. It doesn't matter.
Right.
So if you did that, you're fine. You can do that right now.
You can rent your house, but it's not short term.
You just can't rent it. You can't rent it to, 3 days at a time for 6 months. You can rent it for 6 months.
So I'm also very sensitive to the fact that one of the reasons, and part of the comprehensive plan, one of our goals of doing this is to assist people to stay in their homes by being able to derive rental income. That absolutely is one of our goals. And I was a bit disturbed by the tone of some of the communications we got, We're working on this, these are preliminary proposals, obviously we're working on this. And one thing related to that, I would think the fee is a bit too high. If we want to make this.
Well, that's
Let's
talk about the 90.
To the rental thing, just a second, because okay, so we know that bordering, or whatever.
renting out one room.
Renting out a room for boarders is
Or a-
legal, right?
Or a dog. Who knows? A person, a dog.
When do you get beyond short-term rental legally and actually have a rental, like if you're doing 3 months or 6 months, you could rent it to someone?
Then it's not regulated by this law. This
I know,
law.
I understand. I'm trying to see where the other side, the other legal limit is.
It's more than one room.
Right, but
So if you rent 2 rooms out,
For how long?
so anything less than 30 days.
Is 30 days the legal, is.
That's the New York State limit, is my understanding.
Okay.
Right, so if you want to rent your whole house out for the year, can you do that?
Yes.
Okay.
If you want
As
to
long
do
as
it
it's
for
more.
31 days, you can do it.
Okay. You can rent.
Do you have to meet New York State building codes?
Not for more than 30
Not
days.
for more than 30 days.
That's it, it really is.
Right, so
Okay, so it seems like the long windows are really taken care of by other mechanisms, even if they are found out through Airbnb or VRBO, who cares those mechanisms, because it's just a different. And
So
that's-
this is specifically short-term rentals, almost by definition in residential neighborhoods. So that's the balance we're trying to strike.
And that's me with the 90 days, so it's like, well, if I want to rent it out for the whole summer, well, you can do that. You just can't rent it out, to 60 different people all during the summer. Like, as long as you have, sometimes like, I want to go away for the whole summer, I want to rent it out, you can do that. You can't have, someone coming every 3 days.
Well,
Also.
you're away.
You can swap your house with somebody from Paris for the entire summer.
Yes.
So this
Or the month of
really,
July.
this is, and I think that's some of the discussion, this is a pretty narrow issue of short-term rentals.
I'm not sure that's totally clear in the discussions.
No, I don't
Oh,
think so.
yeah, no, I think a lot of.
They were looking at the
Yeah.
longer limits.
Yeah, like if I want to rent it out for 2 months, well, you can do that now. So I think that was part of the communication that maybe we failed on a little bit.
So what we're looking at now is that 90 days, is that too short for the particular short-term rentals that we're talking about? I think it is too short. I get your point about balance. I believe in balance, but I think that with all the other controls over noise and everything else that we put into this, the danger of those things happening that have an effect on the neighborhood, don't seem to be as much of a danger. So I might go with 180 rather than.
It's not a question just of danger, and
Right,
that was
I mean,
another thing that was said in some of the comments that, we're not trying to keep bad people out. We're assuming that, let's assume everybody's, an honorable player here. It's still, if you have a house and you've got 3 kids and they're learning to ride tricycles, and the house across the street is getting rented every week, it's a different people coming in all summer long. Again, it's a matter of balance.
But-
Preserving some residential or consistency in residential neighborhoods, I think, is also a goal.
But I think, the funny thing, I think I have 2 kind of points. I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I think 2 points are, one, you still, with 90 days, you could have that happening, a week all summer long. So it's kind of like almost a moot point there. So to me, you almost have to go really draconian, like 30 days to have that present, and I think it's too short. So, and I think the second is a good question of practicality. How are you going to enforce this 90-day limit without having the neighbor say, I counted, 15 different license plates or something? I think that's going to be a hard one. You can do registrations, you can do, the 30-minute response time. There's a lot of things that are problematic that you can do, but I think the day limit is really hard to enforce.
But you know what, Brian? I know I've said this before, and everybody always looks like me like I'm crazy, but it's true. Most people follow the law.
Yeah.
And if the law says you could do it for 90 days, they do it for 90 days. I mean, there are people who don't, but
Sure.
the truth is that most people do.
So,
Well, the other question then, can I just ask this one?
Yeah,
okay, go ahead.
I couldn't mean to cut you off, finish your thought, I'll come in again.
Go ahead. Oh, all right, so what I was thinking, was that if you make that 365 days a year, well, make it half, make it 180, make it that as it makes it more flexible for the people that we're talking about having the ability to actually plan on making enough on this money. They've got to be able to plan. If you've got to add this and do this and make some changes, and there's an expense. If you're limited to 90 days, the ability to actually reach your goal of paying your mortgage might not be achieved. So I would say we should increase the number, not to 365, but I just came up with my math.
Yeah, so given that these are all somewhat arbitrary numbers, and I do get your point, what about, but half the year is a lot of the year, what about 120?
Okay.
That's 4 months, that's a third of the year.
I mean, I like 180.
More than 100.
Well, how about that, I was just, I forgot what I was gonna say.
So should I change it to 120 days?
I'd go for more, I don't know, what do you think, Mark, what do you think?
I think I could go up to 180.
I was just thinking, because if you did it every weekend for 3 days, you're at 150 or 160 days.
So therefore,
So 180 would cover that condition. But I guess I'm back to, I just want to make a point that we're talking about all the people that obey the law, but we already have at least one bad actor, as we say euphemistically. And whatever we decide, we have to make sure that we go back through and that we haven't created a huge loophole.
Right, and I do think that the one bad actor, the things that he was kind of bad acting wasn't really overnight stays. It was parties and weddings and
Which is
banquets
specifically
and,
excluded.
so I think that, that we haven't, well, at least to my knowledge, even actually received, even from our known bad actor, who's been a multi-year bad actor, received complaints about, overnight guests that, that it was turning over too much, or that, their kids couldn't ride their tricycles, or they were even parking on the street, heaven forbid. To me, it's more, so to me, I could do 180 days. Like, to me, it's again, it's kind of arbitrary. Again, it's half the year, but it's to me, it's making sure that we can really eliminate
Well, like I
weddings,
said,
parties, which we obviously have in our
it would
law.
allow someone to have 3-day weekend rentals for the entire year. I mean, if you can't pay, you would be able to put some kind of a dent in your monthly, but not that way at least.
Okay, I'm not
actually looking at you, I'm just staring.
But it's fine, I can live with that. I think it's a little high, and I'm worried that it will cause some opposition that might otherwise be happier with a shorter time frame. But I understand the arguments for it, and it's nothing to live on the diet.
So I'm assuming you don't want to limit the number of weekends?
No.
So 2 is off, okay.
And we changed the 30 to 50.
Yeah, but now,
I'm crying big crocodile tears on this next one because
Well, if we're gonna allow 180 days, then they should be able to afford 250.
well, there's a lot of building department time that's gonna be spent on this.
that's what I'm concerned about, is that
Yeah.
there's actually, it's not just an entry fee punishment to try to do something.
To cover the cost.
It's the cost factor that.
There has to be an inspection, they have to go through the documents that are submitted and stuff. I mean, that didn't seem to me to be, and you can't compare it to a film permit because nobody really has to do anything on the film
What
permit.
did
Or at least
I mean,
cover.
From you,
Ed and I talked about it, I guess I could look at what the other fees are.
Is the amount of work done on a renewal more or less?
Well, less,
Because
that's
maybe
why,
we could adjust that number
well, we
down.
did have it down to 150.
No, I'm saying even a little bit more, maybe 100.
Well,
maybe
you
make that
still need
renewal.
an inspection.
Yeah, maybe we can,
Let me
I think
see.
250 doesn't seem absurd, especially with 180 days now. To me, it's a much bigger investment. But maybe we can ask Ed what he actually thinks the actual kind of, it might not even cover the actual costs. I mean, that's the thing.
Well, no, it's not gonna cover the cost
Yeah.
most likely, but
No.
it'll put a dent in it. And, I mean, and the regulations from the state building code are not insignificant.
No,
There's
absolutely.
intricacies to it.
I mean, I think actually, Mary Ann, I don't know if you want to maybe quickly go over some of what those regulations are, but those are, that's, to me, that's, to get your permit is not, the registration fee of $250 is not going to be the big expense in this. It's going to be meeting those state requirements.
Would it make sense, and I'm not sure about the answers, would it make sense to have a preliminary fee just to have Ed come in and say, don't even bother, because I can already see 17 violations here?
a sanity fee, sanity check.
A sanity check, like a $50 sanity
Application
check.
and then
A $50 application, and if it's immediately clear that this is not gonna pass building code muster, then you don't have to pay anything else, you got your answer.
That's interesting.
I'm just worried that he's gonna have to go to the site, to the building anyways.
We didn't have to go twice.
I'm sorry, Janice, what were you saying?
Like an application fee, but because these codes are complicated and it may be possible in just a preliminary kind of eyeballing of the place to say, this isn't, you're not gonna pass the codes that are necessary for this. And
Oh, I
then,
you know what I mean? So,
Yeah, but then you wouldn't have to pay the registration fee. I wouldn't think you'd pay the fee unless you get the,
Oh, I thought you.
oh, I see, the fee, this 250 is after the inspection,
if you
600.
get registered.
Oh,
Okay.
fine, never
It's
mind.
not too
Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah,
okay, that's fine.
Oh, it's not just to apply. No. If you're registered,
Well,
then
that's
you
why
have
it's
to
a little
pay
different than maybe in
$250.
the planning board, because there you're putting money out
Yeah.
up front.
It's a gamble in the beginning.
Right, so here it's, this would be.
Yeah, look, I can make sure that
Then I can
that's
definitely
clear.
live with that.
Yeah, then totally, then you're guaranteed you can do this, you're gonna.
Oh, now I
earn
see,
your place, and
okay,
then-
okay.
That's also if you pay $250 and then, it comes up and says,
Sorry, yeah, I can't do it, yeah.
you need a fire escape and,
Yeah, and a sprinkler and, okay, that makes much more sense, I'm happy with that.
You're here for this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the other presentation happened about the Astrobot stuff.
That's not right.
It was short. The 30 minutes response time is too short. I think you need someone that's a manager. It doesn't have to be the owner. It could be the representative. Right? So to me, it might be strict, but I think you need to have someone.
Absolutely,
So-
if somebody is violating this, and it's like, that you rent it to a couple, and then all of a sudden there's 40 people drinking beer and playing music, and, no, I think the 30 minutes is reasonable.
But what's the alternative? The alternative is just to have the police enforce.
Police would come, that's what I thought, the police would just come, but.
But, no, I think having somebody who is responsible for the property on call.
I mean, my own experience is that, not that I ever violated some rule, but, that even with my 70-year-old friends, no. But that even a question about something like, how do you do the, I mean, the hosts respond to text like that. I mean, under Airbnb, they want to be known as a good host. So if you have a question when you're there, it's a little different than what we're talking. I'm just saying
Someone's on
that
call,
they're
right?
used to being
Yes.
ready to answer
I
questions
agree.
from
I think
the
that's important
rental.
to have it in.
Absolutely.
It's not a big burden.
Yeah, the remote control doesn't work.
Right, yeah, how do you, I can't find the, I can't.
Or they
find
call
the-
the police for a noisy neighborhood, so there's an accident on Route 9, and, nobody can respond right away.
No, it's not what it's about, but it's,
Right,
It's not about the control.
no, we're
It's
saying,
control.
no, you remove control.
I know.
We're saying that, so they're gonna wanna be responsive anyway, so putting it in that they'd have to respond to an
Yeah,
official
you have to
saying
respond.
that, by the way, you have made your violation.
I mean, I realize not everything is Airbnb, there's just Craigslist and everything else that people, but I think they're pretty big, and that's kind of the standard, that you respond when there's a problem.
Okay. So the next one come from specific.
Then these were all public ones. I mean, we talked about this one, I know, about whether we should, because I remember I raised the question, do you want to give notice to the neighbors before, and you decided no, but I just thought since they raised it, you might.
No, if they qualify and they get the permit, they pass inspection, they pay for the permit, they agree to all these, I don't think we need to notify for every one, and certainly not.
Is there any chance you guys would take a comment from the
Yes,
public?
having the list, we already did plan to do that, it would be public, it could be online, right?
I'm not the,
Oh, do we wanna take comments or?
Why don't we finish first?
Right.
So where were we on number 6? I'm sorry, we were saying that.
I think
That's
the
what we're
board
talking
agreed they didn't want that, we did before, but this is, whether, the thing was, well, when, if somebody needs a film permit, you vote for it at the public meeting. And theoretically, somebody could come and say, don't issue that film permit, it's not on the agenda, whatever, and that's a suggestion.
So I guess the question.
But that's not the way this is set up, the way this is structured, you just go to the building department.
Right, exactly, so the only
You get
thing is
your-
that we do have if we have the public list, they'll know that they got approved.
Right,
And
yeah,
there will be a public list, that's the next suggestion, there will be.
So-
yeah, that's the difference.
It's
I'd rather have
always the intention.
I'd rather have a public list than have to have endless meetings.
So, right, so
Well, they're
before
two-
the
they're
July
two
weekend, we're gonna be sitting here at the June meeting with 87 possible, 50 potential rentals to approve each one separately, I don't think so.
No, that would just be for the registration.
It's just the registration that they're talking about.
Oh, when it's the
Oh, I
first time, but even so,
But, as long as there's,
you follow
what's
the
the
procedure.
process I mean, again, the concern is you have a bad actor, so the process is still going to be,
Well, maybe the concern isn't that you have a bad actor, but somebody finds out that their next door neighbor is gonna have, Airbnb, and they wanna come and say, I don't think you should let them have that registration because of my particular concern.
so my kids are Twix, but so
Whatever,
we have no
that would be
recourse
the
for them, right?
No. So there's notice to the public, they said provide a list of STRs, that we've already planned on doing that, on posting it online. But it's there, it's a fait accompli, but, what they're suggesting is vote on it in a public meeting so people can say.
Before it ever happened, an ability of the neighbors to at least express their concerns.
I
But
think-
with all of what we're building into control actions by the homeowner as well as the renters, I don't know.
But there's still not a way that you could say, you know what, I got my 2 kids on trikes and I don't want this going on next door. I mean,
No.
would that change someone's decision? A review board's decision? I don't know.
And the other side of that is, I need to do this rental to pay my mortgage, and, I'm gonna be careful about who I rent it to.
Yeah, I think,
You're
I
kind
think
of,
the
you're kind of setting up the limits ahead of time.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to be faced with those individual decisions.
I think that's the
On a
point.
case by
So
case.
I have one thought, maybe this, I haven't thought this through at all, but, at the point where somebody applies initially to be registered, could that be public information? So you haven't gone through, you haven't gotten the approval, and then you haven't paid your fee. You've
Well,
just
it
asked
could,
for-
I mean, but I made that suggestion and everybody
Oh.
said, no, they didn't wanna do that.
No, the
Well,
question
I'm
is,
just
when
making
do
it
you-
Because what's the
What's the
end game?
Oh, what's
to
the
that?
end result? And people know that
Right,
somebody's
so
applied.
then, but remember, so what, Ed listens to them and Ed makes a decision whether to give it or not? I mean, either you have this registration or it's.
It doesn't achieve anything, you don't think, except.
But that's the conclusion we
No,
came to.
I think it's a really bad idea to give people notice to something ahead of time, if there's nothing when they have no.
Well, the only thing people could do something, they could say, I've always wanted to have a little fence here and I don't, maybe I'll apply for a little fence.
Well, they
or-
could do that as soon
So
as
that
they,
they're gonna
as soon as
know.
they find the posting.
Yeah, I'm just saying, we give them more time.
Well, look, here's the thing.
I'm not married to this idea, I'm not.
I agree with Larry wholeheartedly here. I think it's,
What did he say?
Yeah, I didn't hear it.
we're approaching this essentially as a right of the homeowner to be able to rent out part of their facility.
Yes, of course.
So how are you gonna restrict it because their neighbor has 2 kids in the
Right.
truck?
Right, already, yeah, they're
So,
already.
so
So it's not a restrictive thing, except if problems are being caused and then you remove.
Yeah, and I'd rather have it handled in that way than a preemptive strike.
Right, so.
Okay, all right, no problem.
So, no, okay,
Seven,
so
seven's the answer.
7 we're doing, yes.
8, I mean, to me, Ed's,
It's gonna be part of the
Yes.
registration
I think it's-
form. I think
to me,
it has to be a sworn affidavit that all these things are true.
You sign something at the bottom when you.
Yeah.
of course.
You have to do that on a site plan application, say everything in here is true, and I think this is an important one. So we have to do that anyway, so that was always the intention.
And where do you go to get notarized?
Larry's office.
That's office.
Right.
Got 2.
I mean, the certain neighborhoods thing, I just,
Oh, I can't, this next
Okay,
one?
I guess so people know, consider prohibiting short-term rentals in certain neighborhoods or limiting the permitted time.
No, I can,
By what criteria?
Yeah, right, exactly.
exactly.
Lot sizes of greater than,
I just think dividing the village in that way is not proper.
Higher fine.
I don't disagree with. I saw that what New York City's done, I mean, obviously they're.
We're back.
What, you're on 10?
I'm on 10.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, let me, hold on, let me see what the fines are now. Let me see if they know, but you don't know what the fines are.
Higher fines plus 3 strikes.
Although, you know what, whatever the fines are in here, you might want to list a separate one because, just so the judge knows what the fines entail. So what fines do you want? I'll put a fine in here. What fines do you want?
I mean,
What fines did we have? Well, we didn't say.
I mean, I think,
Well,
I mean, I think they
think
gotta
it's
be,
250 a day or something.
I think, maybe it's like
Oh.
250, 500, 1,000, something
Yeah,
like that.
that's,
'Cause then
that's
it's, then
exactly what I was
actually,
thinking.
I mean, the problem is like certain houses are gonna rent out for $1,000 a night, so it's like,
Yeah.
you know, but, and I do think that the 3 strikes and you're out kind of thing, or maybe 3 strikes and you're suspended, I don't know what it is.
But yes, I agree. That's the, if we're not gonna have people weighing
It
in.
might even be 2 strikes.
Does it three? I was gonna say, why three?
Yeah, 3 seems like too many.
because
Just because baseball has it. I think the second
Well, I'm
time.
trying to think, could there be minor violations?
Yeah, right. And it's a
Oh, but maybe it's the judge's discretion, or maybe it's back to us, like, it's back to us, I guess.
You wouldn't want judge's discretion on 3 strikes, you're out,
No.
but the
But-
fine, yes.
Oh, okay.
But then, I guess on renewal,
Yeah, let me see.
Because we do have a provision about canceling the permit, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Keep going up.
yeah, of course.
Yeah, you know what?
But can't you have
I
it,
guess that any of the violations would be pretty significant. You know, that it's not your primary residence, you added on recently to do it, you're not in compliance with the fire code.
But all of those
you
should
made
have been checked
exterior
initially.
Changes. Yeah, oh wait, let me see, requirements for operating. Okay, the number of days
Yeah.
on posting parties.
That's
Right. Party we do, let's say.
That's a $200,000 fine.
I'm just going through them all. Noise thing.
Like noise and parking, anything.
Yeah, parking, village.
Yeah, okay. No,
But so I
But why
would
don't-
say we don't have 2 strikes, it should be 500 and 1,000, that's
But
it.
can't
No,
you do-
250 is
Yeah, I agree.
500.
500, 1,000, and then no more.
Okay,
500.
this is,
yeah, but there's gotta be due process for that, no?
oh, yeah, so you go to the judge, right?
So,
And
but
the
that due
judge
process is with them, so it's up to them whether they want to consider, at the point when someone has whatever number of strikes you agree on,
Well, you
you
know
can
what?
then consider the revocation,
Oh, does the revocation come to us?
or suspension, or whatever.
Well, wait, the revocation thing right now says, in addition to any penalties, the Board of Trustees may revoke the registration if it finds it to be in material breach of this article. And then it's got procedures.
So who
Yeah.
would, how would that happen?
Yeah, because there could be just one
There's
big
gotta
one.
be some discretion in this, it can't be, you're done,
Yeah.
because if
So-
you have,
You would do that for 7 minutes,
you
you're
have 2 little parking violations and then they're done, I mean,
No.
you know, without discretion, that's all I'm saying.
But I'm sorry,
So you suggested
No.
forget the 2 strikes, you're out.
Well, forget, I wouldn't do it so that it's mandatory, right, there's gotta be some discretion left with this.
but
board.
who is, okay, there's a violation of this article. Okay, and we're the ones ultimately that would have to revoke.
Right.
But now, do we review each violation as well? Or does that go through the court system?
It has
Well,
to go through
it
the
actually
court.
might, I can also imagine it wouldn't necessarily have to go through the court. There's 2 complaints that come to the building department brings it to you.
So
Why
let's
would
say
it
the
have to go
complaint,
through court?
so
I would
let's
say
say,
not, because then you got the problem of the court deciding to handle it one way,
Yeah.
and then you got communication, because the court
I
didn't.
think you leave it this way, in addition to any other fines, you can come, it can be, if there's a material breach, it comes to the Board of Trustees, and you can revoke it.
because let's
Maybe it
take a
comes
wild
from-
example, so somebody, let's imagine something amazing, that somebody rented it out and there was a wedding with 250 people. They rented it out, it was supposed to be 3 people renting out for the weekend, and there's this event. That to me is, you don't need 2 strikes, that's
Right,
it.
that's it, that's what I think. So,
Okay, so, but leave it like this.
So it does come to us then, not just the revocation, but violations come to us.
but not,
No,
No.
not necessarily a violation.
Noise violation would come to us, but.
noise,
It depends, I could see it happening different ways, if the building department could,
So whose
file
discretion is it?
violation. They could bring it, tell Larry, and Larry says, well, I think this should go to the board.
right, so give me summarize what we just said about this violation thing.
Which is
What happens? Let's say there's a violation like Janice just described, that it's supposed to be, no parties and there's
So you
parties.
find out there's a huge party on the weekend, as called, the police are called, the police tell Larry, Larry brings it to the board, and the board can
And
revoke
the board decides that it's a material breach
A
and
material
revokes.
breach is the difference.
Or you may say,
Yeah.
next time, put them on
And you
notice.
have to
Yeah,
assume that it's not gonna be brought to your attention unless it's
Okay.
pretty
That'll
serious.
work.
So, but it might, because people, you know how people get, so we want to be able to differentiate the people who said somebody was parked 3 inches into my driveway for an hour and a half on Saturday afternoon, and people will do.
Not a violation of this.
Well,
It's not a
but,
violation of any of the requirements, no.
okay, no, but if it's
Absolutely.
something,
No, but that's when I went through them. Most of the operational requirements are not allowing parties.
Right, yeah, right.
Keeping
It's not about
control over the
parking.
people staying there, you're
all right,
living there.
well, so to be silly
The
about
owner
it.
has
I wanna
to
hear Larry.
let the renters know what the local traffic laws are.
Yeah.
And if those laws are broken, is the owner responsible for that?
For violating a traffic
I
law.
don't think so. No, they're responsible for telling them about it.
Notify.
So picking up on that, okay, so let's say we come to find out that the notice that the owner's supposed to give to the renter is missing a contact name on there, okay?
Yeah.
And that all of a sudden comes to this board, you decide whether that's material or not.
Yeah, but
They may decide
presumably,
that they know they've fixed it.
Depending on
You know what I
the
mean?
context and all the
Right,
facts.
right, that's
but
exactly.
my guess is that in a situation like that, if it's no big deal, you wouldn't even bring it to the board.
So what about the take the parking where they've actually put out the parking regulations pretty clearly, and there's still parking violations of their.
Well, then those first people will get tickets. I mean, that's not a violation of this law.
Right, so the neighborhood can't complain about that necessarily.
Right, just like if somebody drives too fast, they're gonna get, hopefully, a speeding ticket. It's not.
Right, but frankly, those are the kinds of things that people who are against this happening at all because it changes their neighborhood are sort of talking about.
Yeah, it's
And they don't want people parking illegally, even though, or they don't want those kinds of things. going
well,
on.
it's actually a good point because let me see how this reads.
I mean, when, we're not talking in code, when people are saying, that's what happens. They don't know, or they don't care enough about
It
what.
does say, Larry, okay, any person renting out an STR should use best efforts to ensure that the occupants and residents don't create unreasonable noise or violate any provision of the Irvington Code. So if somebody is
So
like,
that might not be a
there are
material breach, but it's something that
but
owner
those
would be
people
responsible.
are, and maybe it happens once, there's nothing you can do, but if there's a regular matter, there people are,
So I
not
feel better
paying.
about that.
Yeah.
Right, then it's a
Right,
revoke.
I think it's
So
material
some of
breach,
this
but it's a breach that
absolutely-
the owner would need
It
to be made
shows
aware of.
lack of
And we need
attention
to-
to that.
Yeah.
Right.
So some of this has to be at our discretion, and we can only anticipate, but so many ways that this might happen, hopefully.
Right.
So the level of fines now, we said, so what happened to the discussion about the level
I
of
thought you
fines?
wanted a 500.
So, and so does that 500 happen when Larry brings this to us, or no, that adds to
Well,
the
no, that would,
revoke?
no, you guys don't give that fine, those fines are only imposed by the court, if somebody
Right,
files.
after due process, right?
Okay.
In front
But
of
I
the
don't
court.
see, I don't see where some things go to the court and some things come to us, I'm confused
Well,
about that.
Right, so the specific violation, if there's a violation of one of these provisions, the person violating that provision would be given an appearance ticket and they'd come to court and defend themselves. If they end up ultimately being guilty or, having a fine imposed, whatever the right words are for civil, they would, the judge would impose a fine. What would come to you is the question of revocation of the
Okay.
registration or the ability to do the short-term rentals.
Due to repeat offenses.
Right, it's
or
not a-
some egregious offense.
Right, or as material breach, whatever however you want to define that, so.
Okay, so the first offense is a big party, and the homeowner gets this summons and goes to court, and the judge says, you're in violation, it's your first violation, it's $500. That's what happens,
Right.
and that's it.
It also says, in addition to any other penalty, it can be revoked.
Oh, right then, after one thing.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Depending on how bad it is.
Right, so then Larry, you keep on top of it, and you say, okay, this happens, and then we discuss.
That's
And then we
Exactly.
vote.
That means
Yes.
you're gonna check all the
No, how
listings
many
every time.
traffic tickets were?
No, listen,
It's fine.
the bottom line is, we all know that the ones that would need to be considered for
Well, here-
revocation are gonna be bubbling up to the surface,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm not minimizing
and
my
it's-
active role in this, but it's not.
It's not gonna be a
I just need,
secret.
look, we all just need the tools to
Yes.
deal with it when it bubbles up
That's
to the
what we're
surface.
trying to do.
That's all we're trying to do.
We're not trying to over-define.
No, this is not about, I'm gonna get a report every Monday and find out who's, you know, I don't think that's where we're going with this. I mean, at least in thinking
I
about
think
how
we
to
have, I think we nailed this.
So the first fine is 500, and
Up
then
to 500.
if it's not revoked, could be
Why are
revoked
you
after
saying
that.
up to 500?
Well, I mean, the judge can always say it's less, right? He doesn't have to.
No,
be
you,
500.
No.
okay.
I mean, you can leave it as
Say
500.
500, no, if you
Right.
say 500, it's 500.
You say not up to, you say.
Yeah, that's where you get in trouble, is by saying up to.
Right, right.
$5.
Learned a little bit about sentencing guidelines this weekend.
Just,
Sorry, it didn't mean to bring that.
All right, and then the sunset provision, I think you mentioned if we.
I mean, I think this is gonna be, we're gonna know if this is working or not well before a year, you know what I mean? So it's, you know, in 3 months, this might either be a disaster or we haven't heard anything, and, you know, to me, that's not gonna change in a year, so I don't see any reason to have a sunsetting provision. I think we're gonna be monitoring this closely anyway.
I don't think we'll have a choice.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so forget 11, I agree.
I don't know why, I mean, the other thing is,
That was just-
if there is a big problem.
They don't wanna wait a year.
We just- Yeah, why would we wait a year? Why wouldn't we make the changes required or shut down,
Yes,
whatever?
agreed.
Would we,
So-
maybe we don't act fast enough?
So we did leave the registration fee as is, right?
Yes,
Okay.
because we increased the number of days.
The only thing I thought of there,
And it's because
Of the
you
cost.
do it only if you actually get registered.
Yes, right, if you can't get registered, you don't.
It's not an investment to see if you get the permit. It's
Right.
the only thing I was thinking is if we wanted to give seniors a discount, but maybe it's getting too cute then. I don't know.
I don't like that. I'm only going to 62 or.
62.
It's over 17.
No, that's just.
I'm only gonna rent it twice in a year. It does seem excessive still, so that's the problem.
But could you make the,
In other words, you can't just have an offhand, I'm gonna go out of the country for 2 weeks and I wanna rent it during that period. It's the only time I'm gonna do it all year. Or, don't even make it 2 weeks, make
He's
it a
doing
week.
Travis.
That's the
Can you speak into the mic, please?
Any, I'm gonna be real surprised if you get anywhere near 50.
right, right.
If we get anywhere near 30, I'll be surprised.
Yeah.
How many accessory apartments do we have after
One.
all that work?
Either one or two.
One or two?
Yeah, there was a
One.
possible two, but it was just one.
100.
Yeah, just in case. Now, there was one other thing that came out of the woodwork in the latest power letter.
I was reading it.
And that was something about not giving, the suggestion was not to give permits to places that would actually be impinging their deed restrictions.
Oh, yeah.
That's not our business.
Yeah, that's where I saw it. I knew I saw that somewhere.
Because
I couldn't remember, yeah.
it was because it was the deed restriction from the.
So what, we have to check if there's any deed restrictions? That's between them and.
It's gonna be $1,000 application fee then.
Yeah.
The sentence,
It was, it wasn't make my list. Didn't even make your
the sentence is, it is incumbent upon the village board of trustees to enforce its zoning laws and to ensure that the deed restrictions are complied with.
The first part is true, the second part is not.
Yeah, I was having a hard time with that one. I knew I saw it somewhere, I couldn't remember where.
Open it up there.
Since people have
Yeah.
stayed, I think we.
Yeah, I guess we'll let this.
Sure.
Who is
So-
this?
My name's James Verga. I'm with the
Stand up next door, Mike.
Okay, so you can take this one if you want, yeah, sure.
My name is James Verga. I'm with the law firm Blanchard and Wilson, Kristen Wilson.
hi.
I just wanted to give you guys a letter. This is just a lot of the Constitution and other legal issues.
This is a letter, I actually.
This was one received, I believe,
Very
today.
hard copy. Yes.
And it's regarding how this, you guys are within the capacity to pass this.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was a great
It was, yeah.
analysis.
So if you could pass that down.
Yeah.
Also,
Wait, didn't you bring one?
Oh, this was
to Larry?
I have, oh, sorry, I only brought.
That's fine, yeah, thank you, that's fine, because I'm not.
That's very nice to put you in color.
Yeah, that was an accident on my behalf. I'm new to this, so.
Did we see this online already?
Yes.
Here's this one's on a hard copy.
But you can see the yellow underlining better.
Okay, okay, go ahead.
There's 4 main points, I'll make them 3. I'd like to
Do
say.
you want to sit down?
I could just.
You can pull the chair. Yes,
We'll just pull up another chair.
Yeah, I'll just pull right up here. Here, stop.
you don't have to be that close to that.
Alright, so the first is, I understand that a sunset provision you guys don't think is necessary. We kind of see it as a way to force a review at the end. If it's not much of an issue, we don't believe that this law will be directly addressed. This kind of requires at the end of the year that, it's sat down and the kinks are kind of worked out in the law. Whether it's the fee, whether it's looking at different aspects of the application, we think a sunset provision would kind of allow this, not revolutionary idea, but this law that you guys are more or less pioneering to be reviewed.
We'll hear about it if we get it wrong.
We're gonna review
Okay.
Including from
We will have a choice.
Regarding the public process, again, we think this essentially turns residential use commercial. It changes the use of property, and we believe there should be a public process where a homeowner could have some input on something directly affecting their property. The last is, because the deep stuff didn't even make her list. The key is just enforcement. I know it was mentioned before that enforcement was an issue. I'm just opposed here again tonight because there's simply been no enforcement of the current zoning regulations. We've been the good neighbor, the reasonable resident, the let's work together group. But there's been really nothing to stop the continuing nuisance over at the bed actors.
Yeah, our intent is to stop.
So we would just like that if this provision was passed and this ordinance goes into effect, that enforcement.
Well, the question I have, which is probably may not be able to be addressed by you, but previously we were sent another letter that had an attachment that showed an event called, what was it called? The Future. What was that? Not what was the attachment, but what was, do you know what that event was? Or?
I'm not sure what the event was. I looked online quickly, I think there was a Facebook group involving it.
I couldn't.
Scott, do you have any more details on the event?
No, I don't have details on the event, but I would just highlight, it just happened to be that morning, and here was a corporate event, which is obviously outside of the scope of STRs. And,
Well, that's what I was trying to figure out, was whether it was a corporate event or was
well,
it
another website, it's a corporation, and it's a sign outside that I've never,
And so,
I'm making a leap maybe, but
That's very odd. Future.
yeah, so it was again, I don't know the details, but it was
so it's not the only event. I mean, it's just like, there was a Google event at the house, which I know because one of my neighbors was at that event. So, I mean, there's other corporate events.
There's clear commercial activities happening on the property.
Well, is that, well, my question was, is it a commercial activity if there was no? I mean, at what point?
If I have my buddies over from work and I have a welcome, Bayberry Capital sign, is that a corporate event or is it just my holiday party? I don't know. I think it depends,
I
right?
guess it'd be a matter of interpretation and
Details.
yes, but
You'd have to find out what was going on, but to me, the problem I had was there wasn't enough information that no one could take, I couldn't see how anyone could take action on that without knowing a little bit more about it.
And there were no complaints, right?
No, there were no complaints.
Except the general complaint of the commercialization of residential property.
And that's going to my point of the public process, whether it's holding the public hearing before it's issued or just allowing an outlet for the public to essentially get these permits.
I hear what you're saying. I know where you're going here. We can't overcorrect based on one situation. We're trying to create a system that applies to the whole village and that we can use to deal with people who violate.
And I mean, we had someone that was selling used cars on Broadway. You know, that, I don't think we want to try to regulate that in our short-term rentals. It's like, it's almost a separate issue. I think the party issue is germane because it's, you know, a lot of times it's like we're having guests stay at the mansion and we're having the wedding here tomorrow. Like that to me is, they're related. But I think throwing in like, you know, even corporate events, it's, you know, it's like, you know, you also can't run a factory in your house, you know, it's different, I think.
Okay.
So, it seems like a pretty effective tool,
So,
the way it's set up, but.
thank you for letting me speak.
We appreciate you.
Just to tell me that's a little memorandum on.
And it's
Very helpful. It was very helpful. We appreciate it.
It's helpful to us, but you understand what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think it's.
Have to come to comment.
Yeah, we appreciate your input, you know, on all these matters, actually.
And for waiting until the bitter end.
Oh, wait, we're not over yet. We still
Oh,
got.
that's,
No,
oh, we're done?
well, we have a
Oh, thank you.
quick discussion.
I will make a motion to adjourn. If I get a
Okay.
second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all for coming.